Picture a city of 500,000 people crammed into a space smaller than you'd expect, where the streets run with something that isn't water, where children play barefoot in mud that isn't mud, and where the gap between a man who owns a house and a man who sleeps in a doorway is sometimes nothing more than one bad winter. Now fill it with smoke from 10,000 coal fires burning all at once. A permanent grey ceiling pressed down over every rooftop, every steeple, every frozen gutter. Add the smell of a river that carries everything the city no longer wants. Add the sound of bells ringing for people who died overnight. Add the particular silence of people who are hungry, but pretending not to be, because showing hunger is one of the most dangerous things you can do in a place like this. That's London in the 1760s. Not the London of powdered wigs and Handel concerts, though that London exists too, about 3 streets over. Not the London of candlelit dinners with 17 courses and footmen stationed behind every chair. That London is real. It's happening tonight, probably right now as you listen to this. But that's not where you are. Where you are is the other London. The London that makes the powdered wig London possible and never gets thanked for it. The London of cold hands and thin shoes, and a landlady who counts your shillings before she finished saying good morning. A place where you could watch a man in silk climb out of a gilded carriage in the morning and find his body in an alley by evening. A place where a woman could embroider the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Something that would hang in a duchess's drawing room and be admired for a century, and do it in a room so dark and so cold that by 30 her eyes were ruined and her fingers were permanently bent. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists peering at the pretty church facades and the sedan chairs and the fashionable assemblies. We're living it. One day, one person, one pair of cold bare feet on a colder floor. Everything they would have seen, smelled, heard, and barely survived. I make these history stories, and honestly, I've got no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them or if you're all just people who like hearing about what it felt like to be genuinely, structurally, grindingly poor in the 18th century, back when poverty wasn't a social problem to be solved but a natural condition to be managed, mostly by the poor themselves. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Get comfortable. Pull something warm over yourself since you can, since tonight's protagonist cannot. Here we go. Your eyes open before the bells ring. That's the thing nobody tells you about being poor. You don't need an alarm. Your body knows. It knows because it's cold, and hunger and anxiety do the work that a clock does for other people, the kind of other people who have clocks. You've been awake for 10 minutes already, lying perfectly still, not because you're rested, but because moving means admitting the day has started, and once the day starts, it doesn't stop until it breaks you, or until you sleep again, and sleep again is still 12 hours away minimum. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not one smell. It never is. There's the smell of the tallow candle stub on the ledge burnt down to almost nothing, leaving a waxy, slightly animal residue in the air. There's the smell of unwashed bodies. Yours, the girl sleeping 2 feet away from you, the faint ghost of the woman who slept in this same corner before she moved on to wherever people go when they can no longer afford even this. There's something coming up through the floorboards, something damp and fermented, the exhalations of the ground floor room below where Mr. Simcox the dyer keeps his vats, and whatever he puts in those vats does not smell like anything that ever lived in a field. Underneath all of it is London itself, which is always underneath everything in London, a bass note of river mud and coal smoke and horse dung and a faint persistent sweetness that you've been told is the tanning yards to the east, though you've never been certain of that and don't particularly want to investigate. And underneath all of that, barely noticeable anymore because you've been breathing it for 8 months, is yourself. The smell of a body that gets washed when there's time and warm water and soap, none of which are reliably available, so the washing happens less often than anyone would prefer. Welcome to Southwark, London, 1763. Specifically the parish of St Saviour's, specifically a room above a dyeing shop on Pepper Alley, specifically a straw mattress shared with a girl named Bess, who is still asleep, and will be asleep for another 7 minutes until you accidentally kick her getting up, which you're about to do. Your name is Mary Tanner. You're 19 years old. You arrived in London 8 months ago from Sleaford in Lincolnshire, with 2 shillings and 4pence, a bundle of clothes, a letter of introduction to a woman named Mrs. Carver, that turned out to be worthless because Mrs. Carver had died 2 years earlier, and a firm conviction, beaten into you by everyone who'd ever come back from London and lived to talk about it, that you could make something of yourself here if you were willing to work. You were willing to work. You were still willing to work. The problem, which nobody in Sleaford thought to mention, is that London doesn't particularly care whether you're willing. Back home, everyone said London would swallow you whole. They weren't wrong about that part. What they got wrong was the texture of it. You expected it to be dramatic. A great gulp, a sudden darkness, a definitive catastrophe. Instead, it has been a slow, patient, methodical grinding down, so gradual that most days you can't tell it's happening until you try to remember what you felt like 8 months ago, on the coach coming in, when you still thought this city owed you something. The church bells begin. Not St Saviour's alone. There are so many churches in London that on a clear morning which this is not. You can count the overlapping rings and work out what time it is by the dissonances between them. St Saviour's is the loudest, the great medieval pile of stone on the other side of Borough High Street, its bells dropping down through the cold air like physical objects. Then Christ Church, then St George the Martyr, then further south, another one, fainter, the name of which you've never pinned down though you've been meaning to for months, which is how everything in London goes. There's always something you've been meaning to get to, and the city keeps you too busy with surviving to do the getting. 5 o'clock, maybe 5 1/4. The light outside the window, which is one small pane of greenish glass with a crack repaired with paper and tallow, shows nothing yet. Pure black. December black. The kind of darkness that doesn't apologize for itself. You need to get up. Mrs. Grieve will have words if you're not at the workroom by 6, and Mrs. Grieve's words are the kind that land on your wages rather than just your ears. The workroom opens at 6 in summer and 6 in winter alike, because Mrs. Grieve does not believe in making accommodations for the season. Light is light. Candles exist. You'll make do. The floor is cold. Not just cold, specifically, insistently, personally cold, the way a floor in an unheated room in December in London is cold, which is colder than you would have thought possible before you experienced it. Colder than the fields back home. Colder than anything that has a name in the vocabulary you arrived with. It's the cold of stone that has spent months absorbing cold, of walls that never quite warm up even in summer, of a room where the only heat source is the bodies in it, and the bodies have to leave. Your shift, you sleep in your shift because the room is cold and because it saves time, is damp at the hem from the general dampness of everything in this building, which sits close to the river and has never fully recovered from the last time the Thames flooded, which was, according to Mrs. Simcox downstairs, 4 years ago. You pull your dress over it, brown wool, patched at both elbows, clean as you can manage, and your stockings, which have a hole at the left heel that you've been darning and redarning for 3 months, and your shoes. Your shoes. Let's spend a moment on your shoes. They are a pair of leather shoes, originally quite good, originally belonging to someone else. Purchased second-hand from a woman in Bermondsey for fourpence halfpenny, because that was what you could afford, and because your original shoes gave out in October. They are approximately the right size. The left one runs slightly long, so you've stuffed the toe with a rag, and the right one has a sole that's beginning to separate at the heel with a tiny whistling gap that lets in water on wet days and lets in cold air on all days. You've been meaning to get them mended. You've been meaning to get them mended for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of meaning to, of telling yourself that this week, if you can save an extra penny, you'll take them to the cobbler on Long Lane. You've not yet saved an extra penny. Bess makes a sound when your elbow catches her shoulder. You mutter an apology she doesn't hear. She's sleeping the sleep of someone who has nothing to get up for until 7, which makes her, in this precise moment, one of the luckiest people you know. You don't resent her for it exactly, but you notice it. The stairs down from your room are narrow and steep and dark, and one of them, the 4th from the top, makes a sound like a small animal dying if you put your weight in the wrong place, which is the left side, so you put your weight on the right side, which you've learned to do automatically, the same way you've learned not to reach for the rope near the dying room without looking first, because Simcox's rope is sometimes wet with things you don't want on your hands before you've touched the bread. The passage at the bottom is low and smells of dog, though there is no longer a dog. The dog died in October. Mrs. Simcox still hasn't stopped talking about the dog. Outside, Pepper Alley hits you like a cold hand across the face. London in December before sunrise is a particular kind of dark. It's not the dark of the countryside, which is large and quiet and indifferent. It's a dense, compressed, human dark, full of sounds and shapes that shouldn't quite resolve into anything recognisable yet do. A man at the corner is doing something with a sack that you don't look at directly. A link boy is asleep on a step with his torch burned down to nothing. A boy of maybe 10 who's been up since last night leading people through these streets and is now paying for it. 2 women are walking fast in the direction of the river, carrying baskets, talking in voices too low to catch. A dog, not Mrs. Simcox's dog, a different dog, is eating something in the gutter. The cobblestones are slick, not frozen yet, but heading there, the cold coming up through your thin soles, and the gap at the right heel so efficiently that by the time you've walked 30 feet, your feet are already past cold and into the next thing, which is a dull, specific ache that will last until mid-morning if you're lucky and all day if you're not. You walk fast. Fast walking is free warmth. You've learned this. Borough High Street is already alive. This is the thing that took longest to adjust to, coming from Sleaford. London doesn't sleep, not really. Not the whole city at once. It naps. Different parts of it doze at different times, and by the time one part is quiet, another part has woken up and started shouting. At 5 in the morning on a December day, Borough High Street has the energy of a market town at 9. Carts, horses, barrels being moved, a man selling something hot from a can that smells of ginger, and something else, something sweet and slightly medicinal, which is probably the penny drink the woman ahead of you stops to buy, cupping it in her hands and drinking it without slowing down, and you watch her and think about the penny it costs and decide you cannot, not this morning, not when you don't know yet what this week will look like. You cross the bridge in your mind before you cross it in your body. which is something you've started doing with all the worst parts of the day. London Bridge in December at 5 in the morning is not a gentle experience. The wind comes off the Thames, and it comes from nowhere, from everywhere, from the north and the east simultaneously, hitting you between the gaps in your shawl. You have a shawl, wool, thin, adequate for September, inadequate for December, but adequate is not a category that applies to December on London Bridge, and you knew this and made the crossing anyway, because there is no other crossing from Southwark to the North Bank that doesn't cost money you cannot spend. The Thames below is dark and moving, not beautifully dark and moving the way a river looks in a painting, practically dark and moving the way a river looks when it's doing its job, which in this case is carrying the city's waste toward the sea. The smell is extraordinary. It is not entirely bad. There's a sharp mineral quality to it in cold weather, the cold suppressing the worst of the decay that summer produces, but absolutely, unmistakably the Thames, which is a smell that once you know it, you can identify from 3 streets away with your eyes closed. There are men on the bridge at this hour. There are always men on the bridge at this hour. Most of them are harmless. Most of them. You've learned, in 8 months, the particular way to walk that signals you are not worth the trouble of stopping. Fast, purposeful, looking forward, never meeting eyes. The walk of someone who knows where they're going and has nothing worth taking. It's mostly a performance. But it's a performance you've gotten good at. Good enough that in 8 months nothing has happened on the bridge that you didn't choose, which is itself a kind of victory. The kind that nobody records anywhere, but that matters enormously to the person achieving it. The North Bank opens up into the tangle of streets that is London proper. The old medieval rabbit warren that the Great Fire remade almost 100 years ago, and that has been filling back in with people and structures and problems ever since. You're heading to Cheapside, to the back of a building that faces onto Wood Street, where Mrs. Carver's successor, her niece, a thin, fierce woman named Mrs. Grieve, who inherited both the workroom and Mrs. Carver's reputation without quite having earned either, runs a small but surprisingly busy needlework operation. Embroidery. That's what you do. That's what you've always done, since your mother sat you down at 7 years old with a needle and a length of linen and told you to make something, and what you made was not bad, and what you made at 9 was better, and by 14 people in Sleaford were buying the things you made, not for much, never for much, but enough that everyone agreed you had a skill, and that London was the place for skills like yours. London is full of people with skills like yours. This is something nobody in Sleaford mentioned. The workroom is on the first floor of the building above a coal merchant's storage, which means that the stairs smell of coal dust, and the building smells of coal dust, and your lungs, after 8 months, probably smell of coal dust. You take them 2 at a time because you're still 2 minutes from late, and Mrs. Grieve's definition of punctual starts at 5 minutes before the agreed time, which means you are already, technically, in danger. The door is already unlocked. Inside, the workroom is perhaps 20 feet by 15, low-ceilinged, with 3 windows facing north. North light is best for needlework. It doesn't shift the way south light does. It shows you the true colours. And 10 chairs arranged around 2 large tables. 4 of the chairs are occupied. Marjorie, who is 43 and has the posture of a woman who has been bending over embroidery frames for 30 years, which she has. Old Hannah, who is maybe 60 or maybe 70 and whose eyes are remarkable, luminously accurate even now, even in the grey morning light before the candles are properly going. Susanna, who is 17 and from Bristol, and who cried every day for her first month and has not cried since, as far as anyone can tell, which is its own kind of progress. And a girl whose name you're still not sure of after 3 weeks. She was introduced as Pole, but you've heard Mrs. Grieve call her Dorothy, and she's answered to both without any apparent preference. "You're cutting it fine," Marjorie says, not looking up. Her needle goes in, goes through, comes back. The rhythm of it is constant, metronomic, the most reliable sound in the room. "I'm here." "Barely." You hang your shawl on the peg behind the door. There are 5 pegs. 10 women use the room, so it's first come, first serve for the pegs, and your shawl goes on the last available one, and take your place at the table. Your frame is where you left it last night, the piece you've been working on for the past week. Peacocks. A pair of peacocks in blue and green silk, thread on cream-coloured satin, destined for something. A panel, a waistcoat, possibly a bed hanging. Mrs. Grieve has not specified. That will cost more when finished than you'll earn in 3 months. Possibly 6. You've stopped calculating it exactly because the calculation doesn't make you feel anything useful. The candles are lit. 4 candles in the room, positioned to give maximum light to maximum workers, which means some positions get decent light, and some get the edges of it. You're in a middle position today, which is acceptable. You thread your needle without thinking about it. Your fingers know this, have known it for years, can do it in near dark by feel, and you begin. The peacock's tail is the hard part. Not technically hard. You're good enough at this that technically hard is almost a compliment, but time-consuming, exacting. The kind of work that asks your eyes to do things they were not designed to do for extended periods, which is why Marjorie's back is bent the way it is, and why old Hannah, whose eyes are remarkable, gets headaches that she treats with vinegar compresses, and something she buys from a woman off Aldgate that may or may not be medicine. The trick is the shading. Each feather of the peacock's tail needs to shift. Blue at the base, deepening, then a flash of green, then a spot of gold at the eye, all achieved with different threads of different weights laid in at different angles. And the angle is everything. The angle is what separates embroidery that looks like embroidery from embroidery that looks like something real. Your mother taught you the angle. Your mother's mother taught your mother. This is a skill that passes between women like a secret, from hand to hand, because it's not the kind of thing you can explain in a sentence. Mrs. Grieve comes in at 6:30. She always comes at past, not at 6 when the work starts, though she would dock your wages if you arrived at past. This is not a contradiction you've ever heard her address. She's a thin woman, as mentioned, but thin in a particular way. Angular, economical, a woman whose body has been organised around efficiency and who has applied the same principle to everything else. Her dress is always dark blue or dark grey or black, and always well made, not fine but well made. The dress of a woman who understands what clothes are for and has made peace with that understanding. Her hair is brown, going grey, pinned back so tight it pulls at the corners of her eyes. She is, you think, in her middle 40s. She looks at you sometimes in a way that suggests she was once in her middle 20s and remembers it without nostalgia. She walks the room. She looks at the work. She says nothing for 2 full minutes, which is either a good sign or a bad one, and you've never worked out which. And then she stops behind old Hannah and makes a small sound. The gold on that band is pulling. Hannah's needle stops. It's the backing, she says. The satin's thinner than it ought to be. The backing is what it is. The gold is pulling. A pause. Hannah adjusts something, makes 3 stitches. Better? Mrs. Grieve looks for long enough that the silence has weight. Do it again when it's done, and Mary, You look up. The shading on the second tail feather from the left is inconsistent. You've gone a thread too heavy on the green. You look at it. She's right. You hate that she's right, not because she's pointing it out. She's your employer and pointing things out is essentially the job. But because you were looking at that tail feather 20 minutes ago and you didn't see it, your eyes are tired. Your eyes are always tired. You started the day in the dark and you'll end it in something barely better than dark, and between those 2 points, your eyes are doing work that would exhaust a much younger version of yourself. You are 19. I'll correct it, you say. You'll do more than correct it. You'll work it back to the point before the error and redo the feather properly, which means unpicking half an hour of work, which means tonight you'll be further behind on a piece that's already due at the end of the week. Yes, Mrs. Grieve. She moves on. You set down your needle. You breathe for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to decide not to say the thing you're thinking, and then you reach for your small scissors and you begin the careful, maddening work of undoing what you've done. This is what nobody talks about when they talk about skilled work. The undoing, the going back, the hour of good, careful labour that turns out to have a flaw in its foundation, which means not just the labour is lost, but the time and the focus and the particular effort of concentration that you spent getting into that state of good, careful work, which is not a state you can step into and out of at will, which takes time to reach, which has to be rebuilt from scratch every time you're interrupted. 3 stitches in the wrong weight of thread found by someone else's eyes. 1 hour gone. The room fills up by 7. 10 women at their frames by 7:15. The table's crowded now, the north light doing its best through 3 windows smeared with the ambient grime of London that settles on every surface that isn't regularly cleaned, which these windows are not because nobody's job it is to clean them. The room smells of women working, not unpleasantly, or not more unpleasantly than any heated space with 10 people in it would smell in December, and of the wax of candles and the faint chemical sweetness of dyes in the silk thread, and underneath it all, faint but persistent, the coal from below. The work is quiet. That's the thing about needlework. It produces almost no sound. A needle going through fabric makes no noise worth speaking of. The occasional snip of scissors, the small sound of thread being pulled through, a whisper of tension releasing, women clearing their throats, shifting in chairs. Marjorie has a cough she's had since November that she suppresses with tremendous effort during working hours and releases in long, productive series on the stairs and in the corridor. You've stopped worrying that it's consumption. Probably. You work. You undo and redo the tail feather. You find your rhythm, the particular state of attention that good needlework requires, which is not quite trance but is something in that direction. A narrowing of the world, the 6 inches of satin immediately in front of you, the thread, the needle, the colour shifting as it should, the shape emerging, and for 2 hours, roughly between 8 and 10, you're inside the work, and the work is going right, and the morning's ache in your feet fades to background noise, and even the cold, which has settled into the room despite the bodies and the candles and the sealed windows, becomes something you're simply carrying rather than something actively happening to you. By 10, the candles on 2 of the tables have been snuffed. Enough light now from the windows that they're an extravagance, and one of the women, a red-faced girl from somewhere in Essex whose name is Anne, produces a piece of bread from her pocket and begins eating it without looking up from her work. Nobody says anything. Mrs. Grieve has not returned since her morning inspection. This is the informal moment in the day, the 20 minutes before she comes back to check the morning's progress, when the room breathes a little. Cold last night, Susanna says to no one in particular. It's December, Marjorie says. It's going to snow. You can feel it. You can feel it. There's something in the air, not yet committed to snow but working toward it, a particular held quality, the world waiting. Snow in London is not what snow is in Lincolnshire. In Lincolnshire, snow is clean and quiet and covers things. In London, snow is complicated. It comes down white and turns grey before it hits the ground, and within a day is black at the edges and the consistency of something you'd rather not identify, and it doesn't solve the cold so much as add a new texture to it, and it makes the crossing on London Bridge interesting in ways you don't enjoy. My landladies put the price of coal up, Anne says. Her voice has the flat quality of a statement made to nobody, to the air, to the room. 2p more a bushel since last week. She's within her rights, Marjorie says. She's within her rights to be a piece of work, Anne says. A small sound from somewhere that might be a laugh. Mrs. Greaves' door at the far end of the room stays closed. 2 months ago, your landlord, not Mrs. Simcox, who is the landlady, but her husband, who comes up from the ground floor on the first of each month with the look of a man performing an unpleasant duty, told you that the rent was going up by 6p. 6p a month. The room you share with Bess cost you each 1.06. It was going to cost you 2 shillings. He said it in the same tone a man uses to announce the weather, a fact of nature, a thing that simply was. You asked why. He said materials were dearer. He said there were improvements. You looked around the room that has not been improved in living memory, and you said you understood, and you went back upstairs and sat on the mattress and worked out what 6p meant. What 6p meant at that point was that you were spending 11 shillings and 3p a week on rent, food, candles, stockings, and all the miscellaneous small costs that survival in a city accrues. You were earning 11 shillings and 6p a week from Mrs. Grieve on a good week, when the pieces were going well, and there were no deductions for errors and no gaps between commissions. Your margin was 3p. 3 pennies a week between you and the next category down, which is the category you'd rather not think about. The 6p ate that margin and went past it. You are now, on a good week, at break even. On a bad week, a week with an error, a week with a piece that goes slowly, a week when Mrs. Greaves' commission load is light and she can only use you for 4 days, you're behind. And behind accumulates. Behind doesn't fix itself. Behind is a direction, not a position, and the direction is down. You have not told Bess this. You have not told anyone this. In Sleaford, if you had a money problem, you told someone, because in Sleaford the people you told had known your family for 3 generations, and might help or might not, but would at least understand what kind of trouble this was. In London, you have not established the equivalent networks, and in any case, London's relationship with other people's money problems is not one of sympathy, but of a kind of fascinated distance, the same way you'd watch a wagon wheel coming loose, with interest rather than alarm, unless it's your wagon. Marjorie looks at you across the table. She has a way of looking that takes in more than it appears to. She's been doing this work in this room or rooms very like it since she was 15, which means 28 years, which means she's seen every version of the situation you're in and has opinions about it, though she keeps them mostly to herself. How's the peacock coming, she asks. It'll be done by Friday if I don't lose any more time. Mrs. Greaves got a commission for a fire screen, 5 panels, she'll want her best workers on it. You understand what this means. It means Mrs. Grieve is planning to offer you the commission, which is a good thing because it means work and wages. It also means Mrs. Grieve is planning to assess whether you're worth it, which is a less good thing because your morning's error will be a data point in that assessment. The tail feathers right now, you say. Marjorie looks down at her own work. Good, she says. And that's the whole of the conversation, which is, in Marjorie's economy, relatively long. The morning goes on. By 11, the work has its own momentum. The room is a machine. 10 women feeding time and skill into it. This silk moving through fingers that know what they're doing. The light shifting as clouds move outside and the north window gives you different qualities of grey in rotation. You've been in the same posture for 5 hours now, and the muscles of your back and shoulders have moved past ache into a kind of general understanding with the work and accommodation. You'll pay for it tonight. You pay for it every night, and by Friday evening your back has a particular quality of pain that Sunday does not fully resolve, and so by Monday you're starting not quite from zero, but from somewhere close to it. Around noon, the door opens and a boy comes in with a package. He's 12, maybe 13, messenger work age, with the slightly hunted look that messenger boys develop in London. The city uses them hard and discards them when they're too old to be fast enough. He hands the package to Mrs. Grieve, who has materialised from her inner room with the timing of a woman who always seems to know when someone's at the door, and there's a low exchange between them, and then the boy goes, and Mrs. Grieve brings the package to the table. 3 yards of Italian silk, blue, Lady Whitmore's panel. She lays the package on the table and opens it. The fabric that comes out is extraordinary. Even in the flat winter light of the north windows, it does something. It shifts. It moves with the air. It catches what little light there is and does something to it that ordinary fabric doesn't do. 3 yards of it, cost of which you would rather not calculate, because you've worked out what Lady Whitmore's commission must be paying Mrs. Grieve, and you've worked out what fraction of that you see in your wages, and the arithmetic is not something that makes the next few hours easier. Mary will take the first panel, Mrs. Grieve says. You look up. Lady Whitmore has specified peacock motifs. Since you're already on the peacocks, you're the most practised. She looks at your current piece. When is the current piece due? Friday. Move it to Thursday. The Whitmore panel starts Monday. I'll want a design sketch by Friday afternoon. A design sketch, which means you'll be working through your dinner break on Friday, and possibly through part of the evening, which was supposed to be the evening you mended your stocking, bought the bread you've been putting off buying, and slept more than 5 hours. Yes, Mrs. Grieve. She goes back to her room. The door closes. Marjorie says without looking up, Congratulations. Is that what this is? Whitmore pays well. Mrs. Grieve takes half, but the half that's left is more than you're making now. You think about this. You do the calculation carefully, the way you've learned to do every calculation in London, with the attention of someone who knows that rounding up costs you. If the commission is what you think it might be, and Marjorie would know better than you, then the Whitmore panel could be 3 weeks of wages above your current rate, which would pay off the debt you've been accruing this month and leave something left over. Something. Not much, but something. How's the Whitmore work, you ask, carefully? Exacting. She's used this workroom before. She knows what she's paying for. Marjorie makes 3 stitches. Don't let her put you off your rhythm. What does that mean? It means Lady Whitmore visits. She looks at the work in progress. She has opinions. Another 3 stitches. She once made a girl unpick an entire morning's embroidery because the blue was one shade too dark. The girl in question had matched it precisely to the sample. What was the problem? The sample, Marjorie says, had faded since Lady Whitmore last looked at it. A pause. You're not sure if this is supposed to be funny. From Marjorie's face it might be. Or might be a warning. Possibly both. The bow was wrong, Marjorie adds, in a slightly different tone as if quoting something, even when it wasn't. You go back to your peacock. The tail feather is right now, the green properly weighted, the shading making the gradation you need it to make. You work it forward. Careful, careful. The needle going in at the angle your mother showed you. The angle that makes the difference between embroidery and something real. By the time the room breaks for dinner, 1/2 an hour, noon precisely, 11 women with their pieces set down and the room suddenly full of the sound of people who've been mostly silent for 6 hours. You've recovered the morning's lost time. Small victory. The kind that nobody records anywhere but that matters enormously. The dinner break, 1/2 an hour. You eat what you've brought. Bread, a piece of cheese so hard it took negotiation at the cheese shop, a bit of cold potato you cooked 2 nights ago, and have been carrying around in a cloth because reheating anything cost fuel, and fuel costs money. You eat standing at the window looking out at the narrow slice of Wood Street visible from this angle, the people moving through it, the carts, the perpetual London motion that doesn't pause for dinner breaks or much else. The other women spread out. Some eat at the table, some go to the small landing outside, some descend to the street for air. Old Hannah has a pie, which she eats with the careful economy of a woman who knows the value of things and does not take anything for granted, not even a pie. The smell of it, hot pastry, some kind of meat, gravy, is remarkable in the cold room, and you experience a moment of want that is so specific and physical it's almost embarrassing. The want of a specific thing, a hot, savoury thing, rather than the cold potato in your cloth. You eat the cold potato. It's fine. It's food. Bess told you, before you came to London, that Bess's cousin had said you could live on shilling a week if you were careful. Bess's cousin was wrong. Bess's cousin had perhaps not been to London, or had been to a version of London that doesn't match the one you've encountered, or was lying, or was careful in ways that require going hungry. You've tried going hungry. You've been going hungry in a moderate way since October, the way you go hungry when you can't afford to eat properly but can afford to eat enough to work. The mathematics of it are precise and awful. Too little food and you make mistakes, and mistakes cost wages, and losing wages costs more than the food you saved. So you eat enough to work, just enough. This is a calculation that takes up a surprising amount of brain space once you start making it. The kind of calculation that you can't quite stop doing, even when you're doing other things, so that there's a second conversation always running in the background of your mind. A quiet, obsessive conversation about money and food and the gap between them. 3p. That was the margin. Was. Past tense. The afternoon. More work. The light through the north windows does its slow winter shift. Not quite going dark, but lowering, greying. The quality of it becoming thinner and more effortful. Until by 3 o'clock you're straining to see the finer threads. And by 4 the candles are back. And by 5 the windows are showing nothing but their own reflections and your own face looking back at you from inside the glass. A pale face, a tired face, a 19-year-old face that is doing its best and showing some evidence of the effort. By 5, the workroom has the particular atmosphere of a place where people have been working hard in a confined space for 11 hours. It smells of concentrated effort. The women move slightly more slowly. The movements have become economical in the way that late-day movements always are, doing what needs to be done without any margin for flourishes. Old Hannah has lit her extra candle. She pays for the wax herself, a penny a stub, which she judges worth it because the alternative is squinting. And the addition of that candle makes a small warm circle that she works inside with the absolute accuracy she has always had, her hands not quite touching the fabric but speaking to it, the needle finding its way by something that after 50 years of doing this is possibly beyond ordinary sight into something else entirely. You watch her for a moment when you think she's not noticing. She's noticing. She doesn't look up. "You'll ruin your eyes staring," she says. Her voice is the voice of a woman who has said important things to a large number of young women over a long career and has mostly not been thanked for it. "I was watching how you do the shading. I know what you were doing," she makes a stitch. "Come back tomorrow and look again. Looking once doesn't teach anything." "How long did it take you to learn it?" A pause. Not the pause of someone who doesn't have an answer, but of someone deciding how much of an answer to give. 20 years, she says, to learn it. Another 10 to stop thinking about it. You look at your peacock. 30 years to not think about something you're currently thinking about very hard. Does it get easier, you ask? And you mean the shading, the work, the technique. But you mean other things too, and Hannah is not the kind of woman who misses a subtext. She looks up at you then. Her eyes, which are the part of her that has not aged in the way the rest of her has, take you in with the same accuracy she applies to everything. "The work gets easier," she says. "The rest of it." She makes a small sound that is not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "That depends on you, and on luck, and on things neither of us can control." She goes back to her work. Keep your eyes open and your mouth careful, and never spend more than you have. She makes a stitch, and try not to let the city eat you. The room starts to close down at 6. Frames set, needles put away, threads counted, the inventory of materials noted in the small book Mrs. Grieve keeps, with the precision of a woman who has learned exactly how much embroidery silk a person can accidentally take home, and has decided it's going to be 0. You fold your shawl around you, the thin wool inadequate for what's waiting outside, and you both know it, and there's nothing to be done about either knowledge, and you go down the stairs and out into Wood Street. The cold is worse than this morning. This is almost always true in London in December. The cold gets worse through the day as the air settles and the stone absorbs it, and the sun, which was never really in the story, departs whatever small contribution it was making. The sky to the north, over the city, has the particular yellow-grey of clouds that are considering snow and have nearly made up their minds. The wind off the river finds you through your shawl and does not apologise. You have 3 things to do before you can go home. 3 things, each of which will cost you either time or money or both. First, bread. You need bread for tomorrow. There's a baker on Gracechurch Street who sells yesterday's loaves at a reduced price in the evening. Reduced because they've been sitting all day and are on the turn but not yet actually bad, which is a perfectly reasonable time to buy bread if you're managing your pennies with the care they require. The baker closes at 7. You have time, barely. Second, thread. You've nearly exhausted your supply of the blue-green for the peacock tail, the specific shade Mrs. Grieve ordered last week, and if you run out tomorrow the work stops until she orders more, which will be your fault, even though the thread was always going to run out at approximately this point and you mentioned it on Monday. You need to go to Mrs. Grieve's supplier on Cornhill, which is further than the baker and in a slightly different direction, and will require either a quick decision about which to do first, or an inefficient loop through the city that will cost you 20 minutes. Third, you need to tell your landlord, not tonight, but tonight you need to decide what to tell him, that you cannot pay the full amount this month. You've been calculating this for 3 days. You can pay most of it. You cannot pay all of it. The difference is fourpence. Fourpence halfpenny, to be exact. You have not figured out yet how to present fourpence halfpenny as a temporary situation rather than a permanent one. Because in your experience, landlords don't make that distinction particularly clearly. You go to Cornhill first because it closes earlier. The thread merchant is a man named Brewer, who sells out of a shop that is roughly the size of a good wardrobe and contains what feels like all the embroidery thread in England, organised by colour in a system that looks chaotic, but which he navigates with complete confidence. He finds your shade in 40 seconds, names a price that is, as always, slightly more than you think it should be, and has the quality of a man who knows you'll pay it because this is the shade you need, and there isn't another brewer on Cornhill, which is exactly the situation, and exactly why he can set prices the way he does. 6pence for the skein, he says. He doesn't elaborate. 4pence halfpenny, you say, which is what you paid last week. 6pence. He doesn't move. He has the quality of a man who's had this conversation before, with many different people, and knows exactly how it ends. You pay 6pence. You need the thread. He knows you need the thread. You both know this, and the knowing of it is distributed unequally in his favour, and that is what 6pence buys you. This particular skein of this particular blue-green that nobody else in the city stocks to this specification, plus the knowledge of exactly how the transaction is going to go every time you need to make it. Thank you, you say. He says, and turns to the next customer before you finish saying it. Gracechurch Street. The baker. You walk fast. You're always walking fast now. London has made you into someone who walks fast. You walked slowly in Sleaford because there was no particular reason to hurry, and now there is always a particular reason to hurry, and you have internalized it to the point where slow walking feels wrong, feels like a luxury. And the streets are thick with evening traffic, people finishing the day, people starting the evening, the particular transitional chaos of a city changing gears. A carriage cuts through the intersection at Fenchurch Street and you step back into a doorway to let it pass and get a boot heel's worth of something on your dress that you will not look at closely because knowing won't help. The bread is 6pence for 2 yesterday's loaves, which is a price that has gone up since last month. Everything goes up. You've noticed this with the focus of a person who has no choice but to notice it. The specific rhythm of things getting incrementally more expensive at a rate slightly faster than your wages allow for, which is not dramatic and not visible as a single moment, but which accumulates the way everything accumulates, the way the gap grows, quietly, without announcement. You buy one loaf for 3pence. You'll make it last 2 days if you're careful. You've gotten good at careful. The walk back to Southwark, London Bridge again, in the dark this time, the wind still doing what it does, the Thames below carrying its invisible cargo toward the sea. You're tired. Not dramatically tired, not the collapsing kind of tired, but the deep-seated, boned-in tired of a body that started moving at 5 a.m. and hasn't stopped and won't stop until it has to, and what it has to stop for is not comfort, but the necessary preparation for starting again tomorrow. You think, on the bridge, about tomorrow, about the peacock, which is going well now that the feather is right, about the Whitmore Commission and what Marjorie said about Lady Whitmore visiting. about the design sketch you'll need to produce by Friday, and what it should look like. You think about fourpence halfpenny and how to say it. You think about the skein of thread in your pocket and the loaf of bread under your arm, and the specific quality of tiredness in your shoulders and feet. And you think that if someone from Sleaford could see you right now, walking across London Bridge in the dark in December with one loaf of yesterday's bread and a spool of thread, they would probably say something about the city, about what it does to people, about the life you could have had. You would not tell them that this is the life you have, because that's not quite right either. This is the means by which you're having a life. The life itself is still being assembled somewhere ahead of you on the road you can't quite see. That's what you tell yourself on the bridge at night, when the wind is doing what it does, and the Thames is doing what it does, and the city on either side is proceeding without regard for you, specifically as it always has. That's what keeps the calculation from becoming a verdict. The bridge ends. Southwark opens up, the familiar smells, the familiar sounds, the dog that always seems to be in the lane by St. Saviour's, even though it's never the same dog. You turn into Pepper Alley, the building, the door. Inside on the stairs you meet Mrs. Simcox, who is carrying a tallow lamp, and has the look of a woman who has been waiting for someone to arrive, at whom she can aim a conversation. Mr. Simcox will be wanting to discuss the arrangement, she says. This is how she always begins conversations about rent. The arrangement, as if it's a collaborative agreement, a mutual accommodation, rather than a transaction in which she has all the power, and you have exactly one option that isn't this. Friday, you say. I'll have Friday's wages by Friday evening. He'll want the full amount. I'll have most of it. Mrs. Simcox looks at you. Her lamp makes shadows. Most, she says. 4.5 short. I'll have it by the end of next week when the current piece is done. A pause. The lamp makes shadows on the walls. The specific shadows of a narrow staircase in a building that has been full of negotiations like this one for longer than either of you has been alive. He won't like it, she says. I know, but he'll accept it. She shifts the lamp to her other hand. There's something in her face that isn't softness. She's not a soft woman. She's landlady's wife in Southwark, which is not a situation that tends to produce softness, but it's something. The recognition of a situation she's seen before. Friday, she says. It's not a question. It's a statement of what will happen, a negotiation concluded not by generosity, but by something more practical than that. Friday, you confirm. She goes back down the stairs. You go up. Bess is in the room, awake, mending something by the light of a stub of candle that she's positioned to get maximum coverage. She looks up when you come in and registers your face with the ease of someone who's been reading you for 8 months and knows your catalogue. Bad day? Average. That's the same as bad. You sit on the mattress. You'd like to say you sit on your side of the mattress, but the mattress doesn't have sides. It's one mattress, shared, which you've both adapted to with the pragmatism of people who have no other option, and put the bread and the thread on the small wooden shelf that serves as a table, a dresser, a general repository for everything you jointly own that isn't on your bodies. I got the Whitmore commission, you say. Bess looks up again. The fire screen? Panel, first panel. How much? You tell her what you think. She calculates the same way you did, quickly. The calculation already formed, because this is the kind of calculation you both keep ready, the kind your lives require. Good, she says. Simple as that. Good. Not effusive, not congratulatory. Just good. The word that means something useful is happening in a life where useful things don't always happen on schedule. You put on your other stockings, your sleep stockings, which you've designated as sleep stockings, and which are only slightly better than your work stockings. But the distinction matters, and you eat half the bread, and Bess eats a bit of something she had from earlier, and you talk about small things, the neighbour who's been fighting, the quality of coal this winter, a woman Bess knows from her work who's getting married in the spring to a man in Bermondsey. The candle gets low, you let it get low and then out, because candles cost money, and the night after you've blown out the candle is just the dark, which is free. In the dark, on the mattress, Bess's breathing slows to sleep, with the ease of someone who is tired enough that sleep is not a project, but simply a thing that happens. You lie there for a while, your feet ache. Your shoulders have the specific tightness of 11 hours of bent-over embroidery work. Your eyes feel like they're for doing something they weren't quite designed for, which they have. You think about the peacock, the blue-green thread in your pocket that you'll use tomorrow, the tail feather that's right now, the Whitmore commission that might, if it goes well, if Lady Whitmore doesn't decide the blue is wrong, if Mrs. Grieve counts it as good week, give you a margin again. A margin of what, you're not sure. 3pence, 6pence. Enough to get the shoe mended finally, which would stop the cold from coming in through the right heel. The church bells somewhere to the north, St. Saviour's or one of the others, ring 9 o'clock, then 9 1/4. London keeps making its sounds outside the window. You've learned to sleep through most of them, the horses and the carters and the night traffic on Borough High Street. And the building settles around you with the sounds of an old building at night, the small adjustments of timber and stone in the cold. You are here. You're cold and tired and working out the mathematics of fourpence halfpenny in the dark, which is not the life anyone in Sleaford imagined for you, or that you imagined for yourself. But you are here. That's still something. That still counts. You are still, and this requires the particular kind of determination that London extracts from people on a daily basis. You're still in the game, which is how you've started thinking of it. The game. The thing where you get up every day and do what it takes and keep the margin from going negative, and the game continues. You are not going to let the city eat you. That was the plan. You're still on it, and sleep takes you, eventually without asking permission, the way sleep does when your body has decided the debate is over, and the night's accounts have been worked, and there's nothing else to do about them until morning. Tomorrow, the peacock. Tomorrow, the Whitmore sketch to start thinking about. Tomorrow, the thread, the light through the north window, the needle finding its angle. Tomorrow begins at 5. The Thursday that ends this particular week is colder than the Tuesday that began it. The temperature dropping in the way London temperatures drop in December, not gradually but in steps, each morning a new floor below the one before, as if the cold is methodical and has a program it's working through. You've added a second shift under your dress, 2 shifts, both thin, the combined weight of them insufficient but better than one, and Bess has lent you a length of flannel that you've wrapped around your torso under everything else, which is warm in a way that is deeply unglamorous and which you've decided you don't care about, because glamour costs money you've reallocated to other purposes. Thursday is the day you need the peacock done. You've been working toward it all week with the focused attention of someone who knows the deadline is real, and the consequence of missing it is not abstract. Mrs. Grieve has said nothing more about the delivery date since Monday. This is worse than if she'd reminded you. The silence means she's certain, and the certainty means she hasn't thought of a reason to revise it, which means she hasn't anticipated any complications, which means if there are complications, they will be yours. There are no complications. You finish the peacock at 4:30 on Thursday afternoon. You set your needle down, you straighten your back, you look at the piece in the candlelight. The pair of peacocks on their cream satin ground, the tail feathers right, the shading doing exactly what your mother showed you it should do. The gold at each eye correct in weight and angle. The birds alive in the way that very good needlework is alive, which is not actual movement, but a particular readiness, a potential, as if they might move if you looked away. Marjorie looks at it. She doesn't say anything for a moment. "Good work," she says. This is from Marjorie the equivalent of a standing ovation. Mrs. Grieve takes the piece at 5 and carries it to her inner room, where she examines it in silence that lasts long enough for you to remember every possible error and consider each one. Then she comes back. "The left bird's tail," she says. "You're hot." "Is excellent," she says. A pause in which the world resets. "The delivery's tomorrow. I'll send it myself." She puts the piece in a box. "The Whitmore sketch. Have it on my desk by 6. The Whitmore sketch, which you've been working on in the margins of the week, in your dinner break on Tuesday, in your head on the bridge both ways both days, in the few minutes before sleep took you each night. Lady Whitmore has specified peacocks, which is convenient since you're already in a peacock state of mind. But the fire screen panel is a different proposition from the waistcoat panel you just finished. Bigger, more architectural. The design needs to work at a larger scale. The birds need to hold their command of a larger ground. The proportions need to consider how the screen will sit in a room and who will look at it, and from what angle and in what light. You've been thinking about a third peacock. Not just the pair a conversation, 2 birds in a dialogue, but a third partially visible behind the others, tail half spread, creating depth. The perspective trick that makes a flat piece feel like space. You've done this before on smaller work and it works. But on a fire screen panel it might be the thing that makes the difference between a piece that Lady Whitmore looks at and a piece she remembers. You draw the sketch in pencil on the good paper Mrs. Grieve provides for such purposes. She provides the paper and charges you for errors, which is a policy you've accepted. In the last 20 minutes of the working day, the room emptying around you, the other women leaving in 2s and 3s, Marjorie stopping to look at your sketch before she goes with the expression of someone who is thinking but not yet ready to say what she's thinking, and then leaving. The third peacock is right. You can feel it before you can articulate why, which is the feeling you trust most in creative work, the feeling that comes before the analysis, the immediate rightness of a proportion or a placement that your eye knows before your mind has caught up. You add the detail, the semi-spread tail, the angle of the head, the way the third bird creates a shadow that gives the primary pair their ground, and you have it. You put the sketch on Mrs. Grieve's desk. She's still in her inner room, but the light is on. You don't knock. You leave it there, under the small glass paperweight she uses to hold things in place, and you gather your shawl and your things and you go. Friday, the wages day. Mrs. Grieve pays on Friday afternoons, after the day's work is tallied. She pays in exact coin, counted out with the same precision she brings to everything into your hand, no ceremony. You've learned not to look surprised at the amount even when it varies from what you expected, because looking surprised opens a conversation you don't always want to have. A conversation about deductions and calculations and the various reasons why the number in your hand is not the number you thought. This Friday the number in your hand is 11 shillings and 9pence, which is 3pence more than your standard wage. You look at Mrs. Grieve without quite meaning to. The peacock panel delivered well, she says. Lady Cavendish has asked if we can do a matching piece. She does not elaborate on whether this affects your wages in any particular way going forward. She doesn't need to. She's told you the information, and the information implies the rest. 11 shillings and 9 pence. You stand on the landing outside the workroom and you count it twice. Then you put it in the small purse you keep inside your dress. Not a fashionable purse, a practical one, cloth, tied with a piece of cord next to your body, where a pickpocket would have to commit a significantly more personal crime to reach it, and you go down the stairs. The cobbler on Long Lane is still open, has been open every day for 6 weeks while you've been walking past with a gap in your right heel, and the mathematics not quite working. Today, the mathematics work. Barely, if you don't eat tonight in any particular way, if the bread from yesterday is enough, if you're careful. You go in. He's a stocky man with hands that look like they've been working leather their entire lives, which they have. He looks at the shoe. He turns it over. He presses the separating sole with one thumb, and it gives with the quiet resignation of something that has been waiting to be fixed for a while. 6pence, he says. You have 11 shillings and 9 pence. You also have rent due tomorrow morning. You have the calculation already done. 4pence, you say. It's a small job. He looks at you. He looks at the shoe. 5pence, he says. And I'll look at the other one while I'm at it. The other one is fine. The other one has a wearing pattern that'll separate in 3 weeks. He shows you the left heel, the edge where the leather is getting thin. 5pence now, or a shilling in February. This is the economy of things, the one where spending now saves spending later, except spending now requires having the money now rather than in February, and that's the part that makes the calculation complicated. But you do it fast, the way you always do it now. The right answer is in the numbers, and the numbers are in your head, and the calculation takes about 3 seconds. 5pence, you say. He fixes both shoes while you wait, standing in his shop in your stocking feet on the stone floor, which is cold, and which reminds you in a visceral way of this morning and every morning. And when he hands them back, the gap is gone, and the left heel is reinforced, and you put them on and walk a few steps, and the cold from the ground doesn't come in through the right heel anymore. Good shoes otherwise, he says. Keep them clean and they'll see you a few more years. You thank him. You mean it. 5pence for a few more years of walking without the cold coming through the bottom. 5pence for not having to add shoe replacement to the calculations. You walk back to Southwark with both heels solid under you, which is such a small thing, such a specifically small thing, that you nearly laugh on the bridge, alone, with the wind coming off the Thames and the clouds above having finally made their decision about snow, the first few flakes beginning to come down, not white but grey-white. Grey London white, dissolving into the river before they reach it. Small things, the peacock done right, the third bird in the sketch, 11 shillings and 9 pence, the shoes mended. That's enough for tonight. That's what tonight gets to be. More than nothing. A little more than nothing, which in this city, in this winter, in this particular arithmetic of survival, is its own kind of victory. The snow comes down. You walk home. The week after the Whitmore Commission begins is a different week. Not dramatically different, but perceptibly so. The way a room is different when a window has been opened slightly and the air has changed. Nothing obvious, but something. You feel it in the way you come to the workroom on Monday. Early. The sketch approved. The blue silk from Brewer's measured and cut and waiting on your frame. The morning still dark and cold, but the particular quality of it shifted by the knowledge that the work ahead of you is interesting. The peacocks are a language you speak, and the Whitmore screen is the most complicated sentence you've been asked to construct in it. And there's a specific kind of tension in starting something difficult that isn't unpleasant, that might even be described as excitement if you had the latitude for that word. You don't have unlimited latitude for excitement in your life right now, but you allow a small amount of it to proceed. The problem with excitement in London in December, for a woman with 11 shillings and fourpence left after rent and thread and cobbling, is that it has to compete with everything else. You can be excited about the Whitmore Commission and simultaneously be cold. The two things exist in the same body. The body that woke up again before 5, that crossed the bridge again in the dark, that arrived early enough that Mrs. Grieve gave you a look that might have been approval, or might have been the look she gives to everyone who arrives before she does, which she finds slightly transgressive, as if arriving early is an implicit criticism of something she hasn't pinned down. You start with the ground, always the ground first, the base work that the design will sit on, the architectural decisions that everything else depends on. On a fire screen panel, the ground is more demanding than on a smaller piece. It needs to read from further away. It will be seen in firelight rather than window light, which means the shadows fall differently, and the colours need to compensate. You've thought about this. The blue-green that works on the waistcoat panel will need to shift, not a different shade, but a different weighting, more of the blue than the green to hold its quality in warm firelight. You make the first few stitches. They're right. The angle is right. The weight is right. The ground begins. Marjorie watches you without watching you, which is her skill, the ability to take in a room without appearing to look at it. Mid-morning, when Mrs. Grieve is in her inner room and the sound of the street comes up through the windows in its winter-muffled way, Marjorie says, low enough that only you will hear it, "She'll come Tuesday." You look up. "Whitmore, she's done it before, comes to look at the early work," before you've committed the design to cloth. Why? Because she can. Because she's paying for it. Because some women like to watch things being made. Marjorie makes several stitches before continuing. She's not difficult. She just has very precise ideas about what she wants, and she's not always clear on what those ideas are until she sees what you're making. That's difficult. It's manageable. 3 more stitches. Don't explain the design. Let her look at it. She'll say what she thinks, and most of what she thinks will be wrong. And you nod, and then you do what you were already doing, because what she actually wants is what you were already making. This is a specific and valuable piece of information. You file it in the part of your mind that's building a catalogue of how London works, the unwritten rules that nobody tells you, and that you have to reconstruct from experience, from watching, from conversations like this one where someone who's been here long enough decides, for whatever reason, to explain the actual thing rather than the official version. "Why are you telling me this?" you ask. Not suspiciously, genuinely. Marjorie considers the question seriously. "Because you're good," she says, "and the Whitmore Commission isn't the last good work she'll give this room, and if you manage it well, she'll ask for you specifically next time, and Mrs. Grieve will give it to you because Mrs. Grieve's interest in your wages aligns with your interest in having them." She makes a stitch, and because old Hannah told me to. You look at Hannah, who is deep in her piece, her extra candle burning, her needle moving with the absolute accuracy of 30 years past learning and 10 years past thinking about learning. Hannah doesn't look up. "I said nothing," she says. "She did," Marjorie says. Hannah says, which is the confirmation. Lady Whitmore comes on Tuesday afternoon, as predicted. You hear her before you see her. The sound of a carriage in Wood Street doesn't penetrate easily to the workroom, but the sound of Mrs. Greaves' voice going into the register it reserves for certain classes of client. A slightly elevated and elaborately unhurried tone travels through the thin walls without difficulty. The workroom's energy shifts, not dramatically. The women continue working, needles continue, the rhythm continues. But there's a quality of attention added, a slight straightening of postures, a conscious not looking at the door that is its own form of looking. Lady Whitmore is perhaps 50. She's wearing wool, dark red, very good wool, the kind that has a particular weight and drape that even from across the room you can see is not wool as you usually encounter it. She has the face of a woman who has spent decades being looked at, and has arranged her face around that fact, not prettified exactly but composed, organised into the expression that serves as her public interface. She looks at the room with the controlled attention of someone making assessments she isn't going to share immediately. Mrs. Greave brings her to your frame. Miss Tanner is our most skilled with peacock motifs, Mrs. Greave says. She completed the Cavendish waistcoat panel last week to Lady Cavendish's satisfaction. Lady Whitmore looks at the work. Not at you. At the work. The silk is perhaps 2 weeks into the base pattern, the ground established, the primary peacock taking form in the lower left, the beginning of the second bird visible at the upper right. The third bird, the one you decided on, is still sketched rather than stitched, but the sketch on the fabric is visible if you're looking. She looks for a long time. You do not explain. You remember Marjorie's advice with the clarity of a person who has very good reasons to follow good advice. 3 birds, Lady Whitmore says. This is not a question. Yes, ma'am. The third is behind. Yes, ma'am, creating the sense of depth and occasion. She looks at it more. You hold the needle still. Your back is straight. You are not, you have decided, going to apologise for the third bird or offer to remove it, because the third bird is right, and you know it's right, and what you don't do is collapse under the weight of a long look from someone who hasn't said yet that she objects. It's unusual, she says. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. Mrs. Greave, behind Lady Whitmore's shoulder, has an expression of controlled neutrality that costs her some effort. I like it, Lady Whitmore says. She's still looking at the work. This screen will be in the blue drawing room. The room has a mirror on the opposite wall. I hadn't thought of depth. She tilts her head. I should have. You breathe. How long? She asks. 4 weeks for the first panel if the silk holds its colour. You've priced this accurately, allowing for setbacks. 5 if there are adjustments. I want it by Christmas. Christmas is 6 weeks away. Yes, ma'am. She looks at you directly then for the first time. Her eyes are grey, sharp. The eyes of someone who has done a great deal of assessing over a long life and has gotten efficient at it. Whatever assessment she's making of you takes about 4 seconds. Don't rush it, she says. I want it right, not fast. This is a direct contradiction of what she just said, but you don't point this out. If you need more silk, send word to my house. I'll have it delivered. She moves on. Mrs. Greave follows. The door to the inner room closes. The room breathes. Marjorie, without looking up. Well done. It's going to be all right. Not permanently, not beyond this particular moment. The mathematics of this life don't work like that. They work in weekly increments, in shillings and pence and thread costs and shoe repairs and the specific negotiation of fourpence halfpenny. But right now, this Tuesday afternoon in December, with the snow not quite falling yet outside the north windows and the needle in your hand, and the peacock taking form on the satin, it is going to be all right. That's what you have. The narrowly, provisionally worked-for version of all right. It's enough. It's enough to work with. Part 1 complete. Approximately 9,500 words. Say, continue for part 2. You said, continue, 1355. Claude responded, the second week of the Whitmore Commission is where the work becomes a different thing. Architected narrative continuation with structural planning and character development. Architected narrative continuation with structural planning and character development. The second week of the Whitmore Commission is where the work becomes a different thing. The beginning of a large piece has a particular quality. The excitement of the design resolving into stitches, the pleasure of watching the ground take shape, the sense of possibility that exists before the reality of the execution sets in. The second week is where the reality sets in. The reality is this. The first peacock's body requires a technique called padding, which means building up the surface of the satin with small underlayers of thread before the final embroidery goes over them, giving the figure slight relief, a dimensionality that will catch the firelight in Lady Whitmore's blue drawing room and make the bird seem present rather than represented. Padding is slow. Padding is the kind of work that produces almost no visible progress for hours. You're building the substrate, the invisible infrastructure of the finished piece, and which requires the same focused attention as the finish work without the visual reward of watching the thing appear. It's the structural work, the foundation work, the work that doesn't show. Nobody who looks at the finished piece will know it's there. That's the point. You've been padding for 2 hours on Wednesday morning, the second week, and your neck has the particular ache of work that requires you to hold your head at a slight downward angle for extended periods, and the candle on your side of the table is burning down faster than you'd like because the winter light through the north windows is doing even less than usual today. A thick cloud cover pressing down over the city that makes the room feel like late afternoon at 9 in the morning. You're going to need to rest your neck, Marjorie says. She's not looking at you. She doesn't need to. I'm fine. You said that yesterday at this time and at 11 you made a mistake that cost you 40 minutes. This is accurate. I'll rest at 11. Rest now. 5 minutes. It's not wasted time. She makes several stitches. Old Sims, this was before your time. She got a neck problem from not resting and lost 2 months to it. 2 months. Calculate what that cost her. You don't need to calculate it. The calculation presents itself automatically. 2 months of wages, minus whatever she managed to earn doing lighter work if there was lighter work, against 2 months of full rent and food. 2 months of negative margin. 2 months of falling behind in the particular direction that doesn't have a comfortable floor. You put your needle down. You look up at the ceiling, which is low and stained and has a damp patch in the far corner that appeared in November and has been slowly mapping a new geography across the plaster ever since. You rotate your head slowly, left, right, back. The ache doesn't resolve, but it acknowledges the gesture. 5 minutes, then back to the padding. The winter has a rhythm you're getting to know with the intimacy of someone who lives inside it rather than observing it. The mornings, which are the worst, the specific cold of 5 o'clock, the bridge, the walk, have become something you endure automatically, the way you endure anything that happens every day, with a kind of expertise that doesn't make it easier but makes it faster. The middays when the workroom is briefly warmer from the bodies in it, and the candles and whatever residual heat rises from Mr. Simcox's dyeing vats below in this building, which is a different building from where you sleep, but similarly ambivalent about warmth. The evenings when the light goes and the cold reasserts itself and the walk back across the bridge is something you put your head down and do, and the small decisions of the evening, bread, thread, the week's penny calculations, are something you conduct in the margins of your tiredness. What you're learning this second week of the Whitmore Commission is that the rhythm of poverty is not what you expected. You expected drama, hunger. You expected to feel dramatic, the stomach's protest, the body's alarm. Instead, hunger, the moderate kind, the kind you can work through kind, is more like weather. It's a condition, not an event. It's there or it's less there. It intensifies in the afternoons when lunch has been inadequate and the body has been running on bread and cold potato since 5 a.m, and it recedes when you eat. Though recently, even after eating, there's a particular hollowness that eating doesn't quite reach. The hollowness of a body that's been rationing for long enough that it's gotten philosophical about it. You weigh 8 stone and 3 pounds. You know this because there's a scale at the apothecary near St Saviour's that will weigh you for a halfpenny. And you went in October when your dress started fitting differently, and the apothecary's boy told you the number, and you did the calculation from there. At 16 you weighed 9 stone. You don't know what the right number is exactly, since nobody's ever explained this to you in terms you could use, but 9 stone felt like your body, and 8.3 feels like a conversation with your body that you're having about resource allocation. You eat the bread at lunch. You consider the cheese, which you haven't bought this week because the margin this week is tighter than last week. The 6pence to brewer for thread having been an unplanned expense when the spool ran out faster than expected. You eat the bread. You think about the peacock. The Thursday of the second week is when London gives you, without warning, one of its lessons. Not a lesson with a teacher and a clear moral, the kind of lesson that announces itself, the kind of lesson that just happens, in the street, in the middle of something you were doing for a different reason, and that stays with you. You're in the market. Not a big market. The small one that appears 3 mornings a week on a side street off Gracechurch Street. A dozen stalls of varying reliability selling things at prices that vary according to who's buying and how they're carrying themselves. You're looking for turnips. Turnips are cheap. They keep. They require no particular skill to cook beyond having heat to cook them with. And a turnip cooked with the scraps of bread from the week, and whatever else you've been keeping in the cloth in the corner of the shelf, makes a meal that the body, if not the spirit, will accept. There's a woman at the vegetable stall. She's older than you, 40 perhaps, or looking it, which in the city is not always the same thing, and she has a child, a girl, 5 or 6, with the thin face that children in this part of London often have in winter, the face of a child whose nutrition has been negotiated. The woman is bargaining for something, a bunch of something wilted, and the stall keeper is saying a price, and the woman is saying another price, and it's going the way these things go, the stall keeper not moving, and the woman not moving, and the gap between them being wider than it looks from the outside. Then the woman puts her hand into her pocket, and she goes still. You see it happen, the stillness, the hand in the pocket and the stillness that means the hand has found what it expected, and what it expected isn't there. You've had that moment. You know that stillness from the inside, the 2-second recalibration, in which everything you thought you knew about what comes next has to be revised. The stall-keeper looks at her. The woman says something, low, that you can't hear. The stall-keeper shakes his head. The woman's hand comes out of her pocket, and she takes the child's hand and she walks away from the stall, back straight, not fast, not slow. The walk of someone maintaining a dignity that the situation is actively trying to strip from them. The child, you notice, doesn't ask why they're leaving. She's young enough that she might not know exactly what happened, but she's not young enough that she doesn't know something happened, and she walks with her mother without asking, her thin face toward the street holding the hand. The woman and child move away through the market and into the lane beyond, and you watch them go and you think about the hand in the pocket and the stillness. You buy the turnips, you buy them and you put them in your basket and you leave the market and you walk back toward the bridge, and the whole way back you're thinking about the woman, about what's next for her today, about the specific arithmetic of that stillness, about the child's hand. You do not know her. You will not see her again, almost certainly. She's one of 50,000 stories proceeding in parallel to yours in this city, most of which you'll never see more than a fragment of, a single moment, a hand in a pocket. But you think, that could be me in 20 years. Not might be, could be. There's a road from where you are to where she is that is not long, not dramatic, requires no great catastrophe, just the accumulation of enough small weeks going wrong in a row, enough weeks where the thread costs more and the commission comes late, and the landlord raises the rent and the shoe needs mending and the bread goes up a halfpenny, and the margin, which was 3p, which became 4.5p short, which became break-even again, that margin goes the wrong direction long enough. Enough weeks of that, and the hand goes into the pocket expecting something and finds nothing. You cross the bridge. The Thames is grey and cold and going about its business. The snow that fell last week is gone now, dissolved into the city's particular grey, and the air has the quality of a city holding its breath before the next weather arrives. You get home, you cook the turnips, you eat with Bess, who has had her own day, her own arithmetic. She sews at a different establishment, a tailor's on Tooley Street, where the work is coarser than yours but more reliable in its supply, and she's been there 2 years and has the standing that 2 years gives you. A small standing, carefully maintained, but standing. She tells you about a girl who was let go today for showing up late 3 times. The 3rd time she was late because she'd been ill in the morning and the illness had slowed her. He waited, Bess says. He waited to see if she'd be late a 3rd time, and she was, and he told her. She eats a piece of turnip. She was there 3 years. 3 years and the 3rd late arrival, and that's the margin. That's how narrow it is on the employer's side of the transaction. They hold the margin and you hold the exposure, and the margin can close at any time, for reasons that may or may not correspond to anything you did or didn't do. Could you have done anything? You ask. Meaning for the girl? Bess thinks about it. Covered for her, maybe. When she came in late the first time, I could have. But I didn't know it was going to be the first time. You never know which one is the first time. This is a thing about London that you've been assembling piece by piece, this understanding. The city doesn't give you warning markers. The first time a thing happens, it doesn't label itself first time. It labels itself just a thing that happened. The accumulation is invisible until it isn't, and then the consequences are sudden, which makes them feel arbitrary even when they're not, even when they were built, brick by brick, out of small things that didn't seem to be building anything at all. You eat the turnips. They're hot, which is something. Hot food in a cold room in December is one of the simple physical mercies that you've learned to receive without commentary, just to hold for a moment, the warmth of it going down. The Friday of the 2nd week, something happens that you do not expect. You're crossing London Bridge at the end of the afternoon. The usual walk, the usual wind when you nearly step on a boy. He's sitting on the bridge, not begging, not standing, just sitting with his back against the stone railing, his legs out in front of him, his coat gone, his shirt thin, staring at the Thames below, with an expression that is not quite any expression you have a word for. He might be 14, he might be younger. The lack of a coat in this weather is its own statement. You stop. He doesn't look at you. He's looking at the water. Are you all right, you say? Which is a foolish question. Clearly he's not all right. But there's no better opening, and you can't walk past without saying something. He looks at you. His eyes the eyes of someone who's run out of a particular resource that you can't name precisely. Not hope, exactly, though that's part of it. The resource of continuing to calculate, of continuing to problem solve. The eyes of someone who has hit the bottom of something and is sitting there. My master turned me out, he says. His voice is surprisingly steady for someone who looks the way he looks. What for? Broke a bowl. He looks back at the water. A china bowl. He said it was worth 12 shillings. I don't have 12 shillings. 12 shillings. You do not say what you're thinking, which is 12 shillings is more than most people in this part of London earn in a week. You're certainly not paying 12 shillings for a bowl. The bowl probably wasn't worth 12 shillings. The bowl is an excuse or an actual bowl, possibly both. You do not say this because it doesn't help. Where were you working, you ask instead? Off Lombard Street, counting house. I was the errand boy. He says it without any particular inflection, as if he's reading from a document about someone else. 2 years. 2 years and a bowl, you think? Do you have family here? No. Then, aunt, in Bermondsey. But she's... He stops, doesn't complete the sentence. Whatever the aunt is in Bermondsey, it's not a complete solution. You stand there for a moment. The bridge traffic goes around you. The horses, the carts, the evening crowd moving in both directions. A woman with a basket gives you a look as she passes, the particular look that London gives to people who are standing still in a pedestrian flow, the look of mild annoyance at the disruption. You have in your purse today's wages minus what you've already spent. You have 9 shillings and 2 pence. You have a week of expenses to cover, and the rent that is due in 10 days, and the thread that will need replacing, and the candle stubs that are running low. You have a margin that is narrow, and getting narrower, and you cannot fix this boy's situation. 12 shillings. There's no 12 shillings version of anything you can do for him. You cannot make the bowl unbroken, or the master less harsh, or Bermondsey's aunt into something she isn't. You have 2 days old bread left at home. The Southwark workhouses, you say, St. Saviour's Parish, they take applicants on Mondays. It's not. You pause, because what you're about to say is, it's not bad, which is not accurate. It is, by all accounts, and your own recent research, because this is the kind of thing you've started researching, the kind of thing that lives at the back of your mind as a category worth knowing. It is terrible. Systematic, organised, deliberate terrible. The terrible that has decided to be efficient. It's shelter, you say, until you find something else. He looks at you. Ask for Mr. Bracewell when you go. Tell him you've been in service. They process that differently. You don't know if this is true. You've heard it once, from a woman on Pepper Alley who had a cousin who'd gone through it, and you're not sure the information is accurate, but it's the only specific thing you have to offer, and specific things are more useful than general sympathy. You put your hand in your purse. You take out a penny. You hold it out. He takes it. He doesn't say thank you. He's past thank you, in the territory where basic social transactions have been simplified by crisis into their essential functions. The penny goes into his hand and he looks at it and something in his face moves. Not much, not dramatically, just a small shift of acknowledgement. You walk on. The bridge ends. Southwark opens up. You don't look back. Not because you don't care, but because looking back doesn't do anything useful. And because you have 8 shillings and a penny in a week and the penny's gone now and that's a penny less for the week and you'll manage it. You'll calculate it in and manage it, but you have to not look back and keep walking and get home and eat the turnip that's left from last night and account for the penny in the week's arithmetic. In the room, in the dark after Bess is asleep, you think about him on the bridge. The 2 years and the bowl. The coat missing in December. The way he looked at the river. You think about what's next for him. The aunt in Bermondsey, or the workhouse, or something you haven't thought of, or something that isn't good to think about, which is the thing that the water on a cold bridge in December offers as a possibility to a 14-year-old who has run out of calculations. You hope he went to the aunt. You'll never know. That's the London version of hoping. You send it out into the city and you never hear back, and you keep hoping anyway because the alternative is not hoping, and not hoping is a resource you don't have available yet. Go to sleep. Tomorrow is Saturday, which is a half day, and you need to be on the bridge by 6, the 3rd week of December. The city tightens. This is something you feel before you can explain it. The way you felt the snow coming the week before it came. A change in the texture of things, a drawing in. The markets get busier and louder, which you'd expect in the run-up to Christmas. But the loudness has an edge this year, or has an edge this part of the city. That isn't festive. It's the edge of competition. People competing for things that are getting scarcer and more expensive simultaneously. Coal, bread, firewood, the kind of competition that happens between people who cannot afford to be gracious about it. The coal merchant 2 streets from Mrs. Simcox's has raised his prices twice in 3 weeks. You've heard this discussed on the stairs, in the lane, in the fragments of conversation that drift up from the ground floor where the Simcoxes live. Mrs. Simcox has taken to buying coal in smaller amounts, which costs more per pound but requires less outlay in a single day, which is the mathematics of someone managing a cash flow problem. You understand this. You're doing a version of the same calculation. The bread on Gracechurch Street is up another halfpenny. The baker says wheat prices. The baker's face says he knows what he's doing and has made peace with it. You buy the bread and you do not say anything about wheat prices, because saying things about wheat prices to a baker who is raising his prices does not change the price of the bread and uses social capital you might need for a different negotiation. In the workroom, the week before Christmas, Mrs. Grieve takes on 2 new workers for the season. Women who come in for the December rush and leave in January when the commissions thin out. Their names are Joan and another Mary, which is confusing, and which the other Mary resolves by asking to be called Polly, which everyone accepts. Joan is quiet, skilled, from somewhere in Kent. Polly is from London, born here, knows it in the marrow, navigates the city the way you navigate the language you grew up speaking without thinking. Polly sits next to you on Tuesday and watches your work for 5 minutes before saying anything, which is either rudeness or assessment. You decide it's assessment. Whitmore, she says. Yes. She had a piece done here 2 years ago, a cushion. Polly threads her own needle with the ease of the born to it. The woman who did it, what was her name? Clara something. Clara got half the commission because Mrs. Grieve said the first panel needed reworking. Did it? I don't know, I wasn't here. But Clara thought not. Polly makes a stitch. Just so you know. You look at the Whitmore panel. The first peacock is half padded now. The basework's solid and right. The kind of right that you know is right because you've been doing this long enough to have a relationship with rightness in needlework, to recognise it when it's there and to feel its absence when it isn't. The panel is right. Thank you, you say, for telling me. Polly shrugs. It's useful to know things. She works on her own piece, something floral, tulips in red silk, one of the Christmas rush pieces. London's full of people who don't tell you things you need to know. Being one of them doesn't seem worth it. This is a philosophy. It's a different philosophy from the one Mrs. Grieve operates on, which is information as currency, held tightly and released strategically. Polly's version is stranger in this context, more generous, and you're not sure yet if it's naive or something smarter than it looks. You discover it's smarter than it looks 2 days later, when Polly, who's apparently decided you're worth investing in conversationally, tells you about a woman named Mrs. Bright on Threadneedle Street, who takes private commissions for needlework outside the established workrooms. Small commissions, single pieces, a panel or a cushion cover or a set of chair backs, from women who want good work but don't want to go through the established houses, either because they can't afford the markup or because they want something the established houses won't do for reasons of taste or propriety or both. She doesn't advertise, Polly says. She just knows people who know people. Is it reliable? Not as a main income, as a supplement when the regular work is thin. She makes 3 tulip stitches. I've done 3 pieces for her. She pays a fair rate and she doesn't take half. She doesn't take half. That specific phrase, in the specific context of what Mrs. Grieve takes from the Whitmore Commission, lands with the weight of a thing you've been thinking about without having the language for it. The mathematics of your current situation include Mrs. Grieve's percentage as a fixed cost, the same way the rent is a fixed cost and the coal is a fixed cost, something you accept because the alternative is not having the work at all, which is worse. But there are other arrangements. There are always other arrangements in London, other configurations of the same elements, and the people who find them are the people who stay in the game. I'd need an introduction, you say. I can give you one. Polly doesn't elaborate on why she would. She doesn't explain what she gets from it or what she expects in return, if anything. She just says it as a fact, available, and goes back to the tulips. You file Mrs. Bright under information. Not immediate, not this month, not while the Whitmore piece is going, and you need Mrs. Grieve's goodwill and the commission wages, but after. When the Whitmore is done, and the January thin period comes, and you're calculating how to navigate it. Mrs. Bright on Threadneedle Street. The information feels like a penny saved. The kind of penny you keep and add to other pennies. It is now the week of Christmas, which in this city and this neighbourhood means several different things simultaneously. It means the commission work is intensifying. Everything needs to be finished, delivered, wrapped, installed before the 25th. And it means the workroom is running at an edge of pace that isn't quite comfortable. It means the streets have a quality of pressure, the specific pressure of people trying to complete things before a deadline that isn't personal, but is collective and therefore inescapable. It means cold, deeper cold, the cold having made its decision about December and committed to it with the conviction of something that has been building to this for months. It also means something you hadn't anticipated before you came to London, particular texture of Christmas for people without money. In Sleaford, Christmas was manageable, not rich. Your family was not a rich family. They had enough in most years, not much more, but manageable in the way that a small community in the country manages celebrations, where the cold is real but the fire in the communal hearth at church is shared, and the feast is contributed to by many, and the season has a warmth of social cohesion that supplements the warmth of coal. London does not work this way. London's Christmas is stratified with the same absolute efficiency that it stratifies everything else. The Christmas being had 3 streets over, in the houses with bow windows and hot punch and roasted geese, and the sound of laughter and a fire in every room. That Christmas is happening. It is present. You can smell it, actually. Walking through the streets in the evenings, the particular smell of roasting meat and spiced wine and pine resin that drifts from certain doors when they open. That Christmas is being had. You are not in it. Your Christmas will be a day without work, since Mrs. Grieve closes the workroom on the 25th. A day without wages, which is the other side of that. Bread, whatever Bess has managed. The church at St. Saviour's in the morning, which is free and warm by the standard of warm in December, which is to say warmer than outside, the heat of 200 bodies in a stone building doing what 200 bodies can, and the day itself, which is a day which has hours in it like any day, and which you will navigate with the same pragmatic attention you bring to all days. You have been saving a shilling. Not saving aggressively, not with a plan, just finding 6pence one week and putting it aside, and another 6pence the week after, in the cloth at the bottom of your bundle, where it sits like a small fact about the future, a shilling for Christmas, which can buy something, not a feast, not a roasted goose, not hot punch, but something. Piece of salt pork, maybe, which is possible from the market. An apple, if the apple prices haven't moved too much. Something that registers as occasion, that marks the day as different from the other days. This is not self-pity. You're being careful to distinguish between the two. Self-pity is a direction in which you've decided not to go, because it doesn't spend anywhere useful, and because it costs the same energy as anger, which at least has the advantage of being energizing rather than depleting. You've had the self-pity moments. In October, in the week when the landlord raised the rent and the commission came in less than expected, and you calculated the margin and found it negative, and they passed because they didn't serve any function, and what replaced them was the calculation, the practical forward-looking calculation, and the calculation is a better companion than self-pity, even when the numbers are not good. The shilling is not self-pity. The shilling is planning. It's the future-facing version of making sure the floor under you is solid before you take the next step. On the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, something happens in the city that you witness from the outside, but that pulls you in by proximity. A bread riot. Small by London standard, you'll find out later from Bess, who hears it from someone who was closer, that it involved perhaps 30 or 40 people rather than the hundreds that sometimes mass in the city streets when prices go past a particular threshold. But enough to make the street on your way home from Cheapside feel different, changed. The normal evening traffic rerouted around a block where something is still unresolved. You take a street that runs parallel to your usual route, the route around whatever's happening, and that street takes you past the edge of a market square where you can see, from 50 feet away, the aftermath. A stall overturned, a man shouting at nobody specific, or at the general condition of things, which is sometimes the same thing. 2 constables standing at the edge of the square with the posture of people who have been in this situation before and have made a professional peace with its discomforts. A woman sitting on the cobblestones next to the overturned stall, not crying, not doing anything, just sitting there with a look of someone who is waiting for their next decision to arrive. You keep walking. You come home. You don't tell Bess about the riot. She already knows, in the way this city always already knows about things. But you talk about it. What started it, or what started the version that Bess heard, was a grain merchant on the next street who had been hoarding wheat, buying it up from the farms coming into the city and holding it in his warehouse rather than selling it, waiting for the price to rise further. Someone found out. The information spread. The market responded in the manner that markets respond when enough hungry people find out that someone has been deliberately making them hungrier. Did they get the wheat, you ask? Some of it, Bess says. He had it locked. They got the locks off one building. And the constables stood there mostly. There were too few of them and too many people. You think about the grain merchant sitting on wheat in a locked warehouse while the price of bread went up and you bought one loaf instead of two, and the woman at the vegetable stall put her hand in her pocket and found it empty. You think about the alignment of those two things, the warehouse full of grain and the empty pocket, not as a moral problem but as a structural one, the structure of a city in which that alignment is possible and even normal, in which it produces no official consequence unless the people downstream of it get angry enough to take the locks off the buildings. Did anyone get arrested, you ask? 3, Bess says. The woman who got the lock off, apparently, and 2 men who were near her. She pauses. The merchant isn't being charged with anything. Of course not. You knew this before she said it, in the way you've come to know things about how London works, the knowledge settling in not dramatically but steadily, the way the Thames settles its silt. Of course not. The man who caused the thing that caused the thing is not the thing that gets charged. The thing that gets charged is the breaking of the lock, the disruption of the peace, the visible evidence of desperation, not the conditions that produced it. 3 people arrested for being hungry enough to do something about it. 1 man continuing to sit on his wheat. You eat your bread. It's good bread, yesterday's, soft still in the middle, the baker having done something right with this batch. You eat it, and you are grateful for it, and you are also tired in the comprehensive way of the 3rd week of December, and the tiredness has a quality in it tonight that isn't just physical, that's accumulated from a series of days that each asked something of you. Not dramatically, not in the manner of catastrophe, but steadily. And the accumulation is in your shoulders and your eyes, and in some part of you that doesn't have a physical address, but that feels the weight of things as clearly as your back feels the weight of 11 hours bent over a frame. Christmas Day is quiet. St. Saviour's in the morning, the nave thick with cold stone and bodies, the particular sound of a lot of people breathing in an enclosed space that the organ is trying to fill and almost succeeding. The service is an hour and a half. You stand for most of it because the pews fill fast and you were not early enough. You were early, but not early enough. And standing for 90 minutes on cold stone is its own experience, but the warmth is real, and the sound of the organ going through the stone walls is real, a physical vibration that you feel in your breastbone, and you come out into the grey Christmas morning feeling something, not exactly uplifted, steadied maybe, reminded of something large. The salt pork you bought with part of the shilling is in a small pot at Mrs. Simcox's fire, because the Simcoxes have agreed to this, one of the small negotiations that constitute the social fabric of Pepper Alley. It cooks while you and Bess are at church, and when you come back it's done, and the room smells of it, the particular smell of cooking pork and the bay leaf you put in and the onion, and you sit on the mattress with Bess and eat it hot, and it is, without question, the best thing you've eaten in at least a month. Bess has produced an apple, source unspecified. You don't ask, you share it. Merry Christmas, she says. Merry Christmas, you say. It is a quiet day. Nobody asks anything of you. There's no work, no crossing, no bridge, no Mrs. Grieve, no Mrs. Whitmore and her precise grey eyes. No thread costs, no shoe worries, no calculation. Just the small, warm room, the smell of the cooked pork still in the air, the bells from the city going at intervals, the grey London Christmas light through the window. You sleep in the afternoon. This almost never happens. You lie down after eating the apple, and you close your eyes, and sleep takes you with the ease and speed of someone whose body has been waiting for permission for 3 months, a deep, reliable sleep, and when you wake, it's late afternoon, and Bess is mending something by the window, and outside the city is beginning its evening. It is a soft one day of enough. Tomorrow the bridge and the workroom and the calculations, but today is today, and today was enough. You file it in the same place you file the other small victories. The peacock right, the shoes mended, the third bird in the sketch. The day after Christmas the workroom is quiet. Only 6 women in, the others keeping the holiday longer, which Mrs. Grieve permits with the pragmatic acknowledgement that attempting to dock wages on the 26th is a policy that produces more resentment than productivity. You're there at 6 because you want the time, the specific uninterrupted time on the Whitmore piece that the last week's rush didn't allow. You come in and the room is quiet and the north light, such as it is, does what it does, and you sit at your frame and you begin. The first peacock is fully padded now. What's left is the finish work, the embroidery proper that goes over the padding and brings the bird into its full dimensionality. This is the part where the work becomes visible, where the months of thinking and planning and padding resolve into something that a person who isn't a needleworker will look at and see. You thread the needle with the blue-green that Brewer sold you at 6pence, and you make the first stitch over the padding, and the thread sits up as it should, with the relief of the padded ground beneath giving it authority. The bird begins to live. This is the feeling you come to this work for. You don't always have the language for it, and you don't need to. It's not a feeling that benefits from being described. But it's real as the cold on the bridge or the ache in your shoulders, a specific recognizable feeling, the feeling of the work going right, of the thing becoming what you meant it to be, of the skill in your hands and the knowledge in your eyes, and the years of learning converging on a 6-inch square of Italian satin and producing something that is, by any measure, good. Old Hannah comes in at 7. She looks at your frame without breaking stride. She stops. That's the peacock, she says, not a question. Yes. She looks at it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she walks to her place and sits down and begins her own work without saying anything else, which is the highest form of approval she offers, the approval that is too self-evident to need expressing. You work through the morning. By noon the first peacock's body is finished. Not the tail, that's another 3 days at least, but the body, the head, the neck with its particular iridescent quality that you've achieved with angled stitches in 2 different threads, laid over each other to create the interference effect that shifts in different lights. You set down your needle and look at it, and it's right. You know it's right the same way Hannah knows things, from the years of looking, from the internal standard you've built up stitch by stitch that tells you the difference between adequate and right. Lady Whitmore is going to like the peacock, not because Lady Whitmore has your taste or your training, but because even without training you recognise the real thing, and the first peacock on that panel is the real thing, and Lady Whitmore is going to look at it in her blue drawing room with the mirror on the opposite wall, and she's going to see it reflected, and she's going to think, this is worth what I paid. And Mrs. Grieve is going to take half, and that half is going to be significantly more than your wages, and you are going to receive the other half, which will still be more than your standard wages, and which will still not be enough to fully account for the math of your situation, but which will move the calculation in the right direction. That's the deal. It's the deal you made when you walked into the workroom 8 months ago with your letter of introduction to a woman who was dead. It's the deal Mrs. Grieve made with herself 20 years ago, when she took over from her aunt with the skills and the clients and the percentage already in place. And she's made peace with it, and so have all the women who've worked in this room in the years between. And you'll make peace with it too. Not because it isn't just the percentages are what they are, but because making peace with it is what allows you to keep working on the peacock, and working on the peacock is what allows you to stay in the game, and staying in the game is the project. Mrs. Bright on Threadneedle Street. That's the next piece of the project, after the Whitmore. The piece where you start building the alternative income, the supplement, the thing that doesn't take half. You've been thinking about how to approach it, what piece to bring her, what to say. Polly has said she'll introduce you in January, when the holiday work is done and the established houses are in their thin period, and the women who have alternatives use them. January then. First, the Whitmore. First, the tale. The peacock's tale begins on the 28th of December, 3 days before the New Year, the year being 1763, which will become 1764 at midnight in 4 days, and 1764 will be, you have decided, the year in which the calculation shifts. Not dramatically. You're not operating on dramatic shifts. You've given up on dramatic shifts. London has cured you of expecting dramatic anything. But the year in which the margin moves from break-even to something, the year in which the shoe is mended before the heel separates, the year in which the bread is bought before you're completely out rather than after. These are not great ambitions, but they're not small ones either. Not for someone who arrived 8 months ago with 2 shillings and 4pence and a useless letter of introduction. The tale of a peacock in embroidery is a technical problem with multiple parts. The shafts first, the long radiating lines from which the eye feathers extend, each done in a thread that's slightly stiffer, slightly more dimensional than the bodywork. Then the feather branches, which spread from the shafts in the particular curved pattern that a peacock feather makes, the pattern that contains within it a mathematics your mother called God's geometry, and that you've come to think of simply as the thing that makes peacock feathers work, whatever you want to call the reason. And then the eyes, the ocelli, the circular spots at the end of each feather, ringed in blue, green and gold, the specific thing that makes a peacock tail unmistakable, and that, in needlework, requires a steady hand and a decision about exactly how much gold to use, which is the decision between impressive and ostentatious, between the effect that draws the eye and the effect that demands it. You choose impressed over ostentatious. You've been thinking about this since you sketched the third bird. Lady Whitmore's drawing room has a mirror. The fire screen will be reflected. Ostentatious in reflection doubles down on itself and becomes garish. Impressed in reflection becomes magnificent. The shafts go in. Then the feather branches. You're working on the third branch of the 5th shaft on the 1st day of January 1764, when the church bells ring midnight and London makes the particular sound it makes at the transition between years, which is somewhere between celebration and release. The sound of a city that has survived another one and is not entirely sure what to do with that except make noise about it. From the window of the workroom, you're working late, staying past 6 with Mrs. Greaves' permission, because the commission is due in 3 days and you want this done. You can see the reflection of lights off the low cloud, the city sending its fires upward. Someone somewhere is letting off something loud. The sound comes through the walls of the building and then there's silence, or the London version of silence, which is never complete. You thread a new needle. You go back to the feather branch. The year that begins like any morning, with the work in front of you, and the margin to be defended and the calculation to be made. By the 3rd of January the peacock panel is done. You set down your needle for the last time on the evening of the 3rd, and you look at it in the candlelight of the workroom. Mrs. Greaves has allowed a 5th candle for this examination, a concession that costs her in wax, but that she makes because she also wants to see it properly. And the panel is right. The 3 peacocks on their cream satin ground, the primary pair in dialogue, the 3rd bird half visible behind, tail spread, creating the depth that will make the reflection in Lady Whitmore's mirror seem like a window into a garden. The embroidery raised and dimensional where the padding requires it. The eyes of each feather with their rim of blue-green and their considered gold. The shading doing exactly what it should across the 12 square feet of the panel. The gradations of colour holding their logic from the bottom corner to the top, coherent, thought through, alive. Mrs. Greaves looks at it for 2 minutes, exactly 2 minutes by the clock on her shelf, which ticks audibly in the silence. The 3rd bird, she says, yes. Was your idea? Yes. She continues looking at it. Lady Whitmore will remember this piece. You say nothing. You've learned in 9 months that when Mrs. Greaves says something like this, it's not the beginning of a conversation, but the end of one, a conclusion she's reached and is stating, and the appropriate response is to receive it rather than to respond to it. She pays you on Friday. The wages for the Whitmore panel are the wages for 3 weeks of work, plus a supplement she doesn't explain but which comes to an additional 2 shillings. You do not ask about the supplement. You take the coins, you count them without making it obvious that you're counting them, and you put them in your purse. 14 shillings. The most money you've had at one time since you arrived in London. On the bridge on Friday evening you count the possibilities. Mend the dress with the elbow patches. Not the patches themselves, which are fine, but the stitching has been loosening and the next cold wash will finish it. The candle stubs need replacing, both of them, properly, not stubs from the market, but decent candles that will last the week. The cheese you haven't bought in 6 weeks. Thread for your own work, not Mrs. Greaves' thread or Mrs. Greaves' commission, your thread. For the piece you've been composing in your head for 2 months. A small thing, a single bird on white linen, for Mrs. Bright on Threadneedle Street. The penny to the boy on the bridge was a penny less in your calculation. The 6pence for brewer's thread was a 6pence more in your expenses than your budget allowed. The salt pork at Christmas was a luxury, and you knew it was a luxury and you bought it anyway. And it was unambiguously worth it. These are the choices you've been making. Some of them chosen and some chosen for you, and the sum of them is where you are. 14 shillings, December resolved into January, one very good peacock panel delivered. You buy the candles, you buy the cheese, you buy the thread. Not blue-green, which is brewer's specialty, but a warm cream and a soft gold for the piece in your head. You walk back to Southwark with the weight of it in your basket and the candles under your arm, and the specific feeling of someone who has, this week, more than last week, which is not the same as enough but is a step in the right direction. The Whitmore panel reaches Lady Whitmore on the 5th of January. You know this because Mrs. Grieve tells you on the 6th, with the particular brevity she uses for good news. Lady Whitmore has taken the panel. She's asked about the second. Second panel? The fire screen has 4 panels. Mrs. Grieve looks at you with her controlled assessment. She's asking whether she can have the same worker for all 4. Same worker? You. 4 panels, 3 months' work at Whitmore rates, which are the best rates you've worked at, which are rates that will, if you calculate it correctly, finally move your margin from survival to something that accumulates. Yes, you say. I can do all 4. You'll need to manage the Whitmore commission alongside the regular work. I can't give you exclusivity. She pauses, which from Mrs. Grieve contains information. But I'll prioritise your placement when the commissions allow it. Prioritise your placement, which is as close as Mrs. Grieve comes to saying, you've earned something here, and I'm acknowledging it in the way I can, which is in scheduling and preference rather than in anything as direct as praise or additional percentage, because that's the deal, and both of you know the deal. Thank you, Mrs. Grieve. Don't thank me. Do the second panel. The second panel. You're already thinking about it before you've left the room. The design will need to develop from the first. The same peacocks, but further in, another view of the garden, the third bird more present this time, more of the tail revealed. A progression. Lady Whitmore will see the 4 panels in sequence, side by side around the fire screen, and the sequence should tell a story, the way a series of windows on a garden tells a story if you walk past them slowly. You go back to your frame, you pick up a needle. The room is full, the January commission load already arriving, the brief quiet of the holiday dissolving back into the machine. Marjorie is at her place. Old Hannah is in her circle of candlelight. Polly is stitching her tulips again. There's a new commission, apparently the same client wanting another set. And the girl named Poll or Dorothy, who's still answering to both, is doing something with white silk that looks complicated and is being done with less complication than it looks, which might mean she's better than she's been letting on. You have, you calculate, 14 shillings minus what you've spent on the candles and the cheese and the thread. 11 shillings. Your rent is due in a week. That leaves approximately 5 shillings and change for the week's expenses, which is more margin than you've had since October. 5 shillings and change. The margin that allows for the cheese and the candles and the good thread. The margin that means this week, for the first time in 3 months, you don't need to make the calculation that trades one necessity against another. You can have the bread and the turnips both, without the arithmetic of which one gets cut this week. It's a thin margin still. It's a provisional margin. One bad week, one commission that goes wrong, one illness, one unexpected cost, and you're back to the narrower version. You know this. You account for it. But the thin provisional margin is real. It's there. And the difference between it and no margin is not small. You pick up the needle. The second panel begins in your head. The garden, the peacock further in, the tail opening. And you're already working on it before you've started working on it, which is the sign you've found that something is going to go right. January continues. Polly introduces you to Mrs. Bright on a Tuesday afternoon, the first Tuesday in February. The two of you walking from Cheapside to Threadneedle Street, at a pace that the cold encourages. Mrs. Bright's establishment is not an establishment in the visible sense. It's the parlour of a house, a wide parlour well lit for working, that Mrs. Bright has arranged for the purpose with the easy confidence of a woman who arranged things for herself long ago and has been doing it ever since. She's perhaps 60. Large, warm, not comfortable exactly, but not hard the way Mrs. Grieve is hard. The hardness of someone who arrived at her professional self after difficulty rather than before it. She examines the piece you've brought and the white linen bird, the crane in cream and gold, and she turns it over and she looks at the back. Skilled needleworkers always look at the back. The back of a piece tells you what the front is hiding, if anything. An embroiderer who makes beautiful fronts by cutting corners on the technical work produces messy backs, tangled threads, unresolved tensions. Your back is clean. It's always been clean. Your mother was very clear on the back. "Where did you train?" she asks. "Lincolnshire. At home, and then 3 years of commission work locally, and then London." "Who do you work for here?" "Mrs. Grieve at the moment. I'm doing the Whitmore fire screen panels." Mrs. Bright looks at the back of your crane again. "Mrs. Grieve takes a significant cut," she says. It's not a question. "Yes." "I take 20% for the introduction and nothing after that. The client pays you directly." She sets the piece down. "My clients are generally smaller accounts. One piece at a time, not extended commissions. But they're reliable, and they pay on time, and they don't tell you the blue is wrong when the blue is right." You note this last phrase. It implies something about Mrs. Whitmore, or about the kind of client who comes through the established houses, that is consistent with what Marjorie told you, and with what you know of Lady Whitmore's previous interaction with this workroom. "What would I need to bring you?" you ask. 2 or 3 pieces. Not the crane. Keep the crane. Bring me something with more complexity. Something that shows range. She looks at you. You have range. I can see it in the crane. Cranes are simple, technically. Anyone who can make a crane interesting has something else available. This is the most direct professional assessment you've received since arriving in London, and unlike Mrs. Grieve's assessments, which are calibrated to be useful to Mrs. Grieve, this one seems calibrated to be useful to you. You're not certain why. You look at Mrs. Bright and try to read it. "Polly has worked with me for 2 years, Mrs. Bright says, as if answering the question you didn't ask. She's reliable and discreet, and her work is excellent. If she vouches for you, that's sufficient for me." She pauses. "Don't take on more than you can deliver well. London is full of people who take on too much and deliver poorly. I don't work with them more than once." "I understand." "Good. Bring me something with range by March. We'll go from there." You walk back with Polly through the cold February afternoon, the city going about its February business around you, which is to say, going about its business with the slightly grim determination of a city that knows winter is not yet done, and has made its peace with that knowledge, and is proceeding anyway. "Thank you," you say, "for the introduction." "She'll be good for you," Polly says, "if you're good for her, which you will be." "How do you know?" Polly glances at you. She has a way of looking at things that's direct without being challenging, an assessment mode that's comfortable with what it finds, because you're working the Whitmore commission, and you're not telling anyone what they're paying for it, she says. Most people who land something like that spend 2 weeks making sure everyone knows you've said nothing. It seemed better. It is better. It's the right instinct. She steps around something in the street with the automatic ease of someone who's been navigating London streets her whole life. Keep doing that. The months accumulate. The second Whitmore panel takes 6 weeks. Longer than the first because the design is more complex, the third peacock more present now, his tail occupying a larger portion of the composition, the garden suggested by fronds of foliage that you've added around the base, the whole piece richer and more architectural than the first. When it's delivered in mid-February and Mrs. Grieve tells you Lady Whitmore's response, which is transmitted through Mrs. Grieve's contained vocabulary as "she's satisfied," you know this means Lady Whitmore is significantly more than satisfied, and that the third panel is already anticipated, the margin. The margin in February is wider than it was in December. Not wide, not comfortable in any absolute sense, but wider. You've paid the rent on time every week since January. You've bought the cheese consistently, not as a luxury, but as a regular item, which is the kind of shift that doesn't seem significant until you notice that you've stopped thinking about the cheese, that it's simply in the category of things you have, and then you notice that not thinking about things is a form of freedom, the freedom of not having to ration your attention. The shoes are holding. The cobbler on Long Lane recognised you when you came back in February for a minor repair, and spoke to you for the first time as a regular customer, which is a social category that carries small but real advantages, the priority in the queue, the confidence in the estimate. You're also working on the piece for Mrs. Bright. 3 pieces, she said, to show range. The first is a fire in deep red and orange and gold. Not flowers, not birds, not the polite category of decorative needlework, but actual fire, stylized but recognizable. The kind of piece that nobody asks for because nobody thinks to ask for it, and that is therefore available as a demonstration of what's possible. The second is a map fragment. You've been to the cartographer's shop on Cornhill and looked at London maps with the focused attention of someone who is thinking about what a map would look like rendered in silk thread on linen, and the answer is extraordinary. If the scale is right and the detail selective, if you choose which details to render and which to suggest. The third piece you haven't decided yet. You have ideas. The ideas have a quality that the March morning light through the north window occasionally catches and shows you clearly, and you look at them for a moment and then return to the Whitmore panel, because the Whitmore panel is the commission, and the commission is the wages, and the wages are the margin, and the margin is the project. The third Whitmore panel is the best of the 4. You know this while you're making it, in March, with the light through the north window finally gathering itself back toward adequacy. The brief London spring light that comes in March, like an apology for the winter. The panel is the best because by now you understand the series. The garden through 4 windows, the peacock progressing from glimpse to present to dominant. And the third panel is where the peacock comes fully into his own, the tail completely spread, the ocelli catching everything, the cream satin ground giving the composition the air and space to breathe. Old Hannah looks at the third panel for longer than usual. When she looks up, her extraordinary eyes are doing something specific. "Your mother taught you," she says. "Yes." "Good teacher." "Yes." She goes back to her work. This is the whole of it, but it's the whole that contains the history, your mother and her mother, and the hand-to-hand secret of the angle. And you carry it back to the frame with you. April. The 4th Whitmore panel begins. Spring is asserting itself in the London way, which is not the clean arrival of spring in the country, but the grudging retreat of winter. The city negotiating with the season in the manner it conducts all negotiations, which is hard and specific and not resolved until both sides have made concessions. The coal merchant has lowered his price, not much, but enough to notice. The bread is what it is. The river, which you cross every day and have crossed every day since September, is doing something different in April, something that looks almost gentle from the bridge, the water lighter, the traffic on it different, the watermen working in shirt sleeves rather than coats. You think on the bridge in April about the boy, the one who was sitting in December with his coat missing and his master's name gone from his future. You've thought about him at intervals through the winter, in the way you think about the things you can't follow up on, the things that go into the city and don't come back. You hope still that he went to the aunt. You've started hoping it slightly differently than you did in December, less desperately, more steadily, the way you hope things when you've accepted that the hoping is the only thing available to you, and you're going to do it because it costs nothing and doesn't require resolution. Mrs. Bright has taken the first two pieces, the fire and the map fragment, and placed them already, by the time the fourth Whitmore panel is done in May. The fire went to a woman on Fetter Lane who wanted something for a library and hadn't known what until she saw it. The map went to a merchant family who didn't know they wanted a fragment of London rendered in silk thread until Polly mentioned it to them over someone else's transaction. Both pieces sold for more than you expected. Mrs. Bright's 20% taken off the top still leaves you more than you'd get from Mrs. Grieve for the same number of hours on commission work. The mathematics of the alternative. Mrs. Bright's income supplements Mrs. Grieve's doesn't replace it. The Whitmore commission has another panel still, and the established workroom has reliability that the private placements don't, the guaranteed Monday morning, the steady frame, the quarterly commissions, but it supplements it in the direction that matters. The margin in May is not thin. The margin in May is 1.5 shillings per week above expenses, and 1.5 shillings per week is not wealth, but it is the beginning of a different kind of calculation, the calculation that looks forward rather than sideways. You have saved 4 shillings and 3pence. In a cloth at the bottom of your bundle, next to where the Christmas shilling was. 4 shillings and 3pence is the beginning of something you haven't quite named yet. Not a plan exactly, a direction. The direction of someone who is, very slowly, by the width of 1 shilling at a time, accumulating something rather than just surviving. The fourth Whitmore panel is delivered in May, and Mrs. Grieve tells you, with the particular satisfaction of a businesswoman who has delivered on a premium commission, that Lady Whitmore has sent a note, a literal note, a piece of folded paper with a seal, addressed to the needleworker responsible for the Peacock series. The note says, she has never seen better work of this kind in London, and she intends to recommend the service to 3 specific women of her acquaintance, all of whom have drawing rooms with fire screens. 3 recommendations from Lady Whitmore. Mrs. Grieve reads the note to the room without saying it's from Lady Whitmore, but she says the words, 3 specific women of her acquaintance with a care that tells you who they are, socially, and what their fire screens represent in terms of commissions. We'll be busy, Mrs. Grieve says, and then, looking at you, you'll be busy. You will be busy. You and your peacocks, your established hand, your third bird in the composition that creates depth and occasion, and that Lady Whitmore in her blue drawing room with the mirror sees reflected every evening when the fire is lit, the birds alive in the firelight, the tail feathers doing exactly what you planned for them to do. You walk home in May with the Thames below the bridge doing something that looks almost friendly in the spring evening light, and the city on both sides proceeding with the energy of a city that has survived another winter and is not precisely celebrating, but is at least moving with slightly less cost than it was 4 months ago. 4 shillings and 3pence, the crane you kept, It sits in the cloth with your personal thread, the one you bought in January for the pieces for Mrs. Bright. You've been looking at it for 4 months, thinking about the third piece, the one that shows range, that Mrs. Bright asked for, that you said you'd bring by March and then didn't bring because you couldn't figure out what it should be in May, you know. It's been obvious for a while and you've been avoiding it because it's ambitious, and ambitious requires the willingness to fail in a specific, visible way. The third piece is a portrait, not a face. Embroidery faces are a different skill, an older tradition, miniaturist and decorative in a way that's not what you're interested in. But a person, a woman, seen from behind, standing at a window looking out. The composition tells you what she's looking at from the slope of her shoulders and the set of her head. She's looking at something she can't reach. Or she's looking at something she hasn't decided about yet. Or she's looking at the city, the London she arrived in 8 months ago on a coach from Lincolnshire with 2 shillings and 4pence, seeing it for the first time from a window above a dying shop on Pepper Alley, thinking, I will make something of this. The woman at the window in cream silk on white linen. You start it in the first week of June, working on it in the evenings by candlelight, which is not ideal for detail work. You know this. You're being careful about it. You stop when your eyes tell you to stop. And by the 3rd week of June, you have the outline of her established, and the window framed, and the quality of the light through the window beginning to resolve. It's the best thing you've made. You know this while you're making it, the same way you knew the 3rd Whitmore panel was the best of the series. Not because it's technically the hardest. It isn't. The Whitmore panels were technically harder. But because it's true, because it comes from somewhere in you that the commission work doesn't always reach. The place that your mother was pointing at when she said, not just skill, not just technique, the other thing, the thing that makes needlework art and not product. You finish it in July. London in July is a different city from London in December, different in every dimension. The temperature, the smell. The Thames in July is a specific achievement that you've come to accept as part of the season. The light, which is long and direct and gives the north windows of the workroom a quality they simply don't have in winter. Everything clear and detailed, the threads on the frame vivid, the colours accurate. The Peacock commissions are proceeding. Lady Whitmore's 3 recommendations have each come through. 3 new fire screen panels, one for a woman named Mrs. Cavendish Harrington, one for a Lady Aston, one for a Mrs. Pelham, a series of commissions that will take you through the year. You're busy, marginally busy, productively busy, the kind of busy that 9 months ago you would have recognised as a goal and would have been cautious about believing possible. Mrs. Bright takes the woman at the window in August. She shows it to 3 clients before she shows it to the right one, which is a woman named Mrs. Fenton, whose daughter is about to leave for a marriage in the country, and who looks at the woman at the window and says nothing for a long moment and then says, "How much?" And Mrs. Bright tells her, and it's 3 times what the fire sold for. And Mrs. Bright's 20% off that is still more than the fire and the map combined. And what's left after Mrs. Bright's percentage is the most you've earned from a single piece since coming to London. You put it in the cloth with the saved shillings, 8 shillings and some pence now, accumulated through the months. The weekly surplus that was once 3 pence and is now reliably larger. 8 shillings is not a fortune. It's not enough to feel safe, not permanently, not in the kind of city that can put a bowl between a boy and his livelihood without apology. But it's more than you've had. It's a margin with some depth to it. It's the beginning of the version of London where you're not looking at the gap between what you have and what you need as the primary fact of every morning. The version where, when you put your hand in your pocket, you find what you expected. Summer becomes autumn again, and the wheel comes around. The one you've been on since December, the one that was going to eat you and decided not to. The cold comes back in October, as it does, the London cold that starts at the edges and moves in. Your shoes are in good repair. You go to the cobbler on Long Lane in September before they need it rather than after, which is the version of the shoe errand you've been working towards since January. Your dress has been mended properly. The stocking with the heel is retired, replaced, which cost you twopence that you spent without the long calculation. The bridge in October. You cross it twice a day, 5 days a week. The bridge you've crossed more than 400 times now by any reasonable accounting, and it's not the same bridge it was in December. Not because it's different. It isn't. The Thames is doing what it does. The wind comes off the water with the same willingness to get between the gaps in whatever you're wearing. But because you're different, specifically different, the difference of 10 months of the city grinding on you and your decision, made and remade every morning on the cold floor before 5 o'clock, not to be ground. You look at the river. December's river and October's river are not the same river in the same way that December. You and October, you're not the same woman, which is something you'd be embarrassed to say aloud, but that you think on the bridge in the early October morning with the city waking up on both sides and the light coming across the water from the east in the way October light comes, low and direct, and without the ambition of summer. Just the light that is available being used as efficiently as it can manage. 10 months. The crane in the cloth. The woman at the window delivered. The woman with her shoulders telling you what she's looking at. The woman who is you and is not you, who exists now in Mrs. Fenton's parlour, and who Mrs. Fenton looks at when she thinks about her daughter in the country, and what it is to look at something you cannot reach. The 4th peacock fire screen panel, the one for Mrs. Pelham, is half finished. Lady Whitmore's original series hangs in her blue drawing room with the mirror on the opposite wall, and the firelight doing what firelight does to the bird's eyes, the gold catching, the blue-green alive. She's told 3 women, and 3 women have told 3 more, and the name that moves between them, not your name, Mrs. Greaves' establishment, but within that, the detail that gets passed woman to woman, is the girl who does the peacocks. As identities go, it's not the worst. It's not what you planned. But it's the one the work made, and the work was right, and right is what you had to offer. You're not going to let the city eat you. You haven't let the city eat you. You are 20 years old, and you have 8 shillings and some pence and a pair of good shoes, and the commission for Mrs. Pelham's fire screen, and an introduction to Mrs. Bright, and a piece in progress that Mrs. Bright doesn't know about yet. Something new, something beyond the woman at the window, something you haven't told anyone because it's still forming, still resolving, from feeling into form, the way the best things always do. The bridge ends. Southwark opens. The bells ring 6 from St. Saviour's. The day begins. That's how it goes. Not heroically, not with the sweep of story, no single moment of triumph, no dramatic rescue, no one thing that changes everything in an instant. Not because that isn't how it could go, but because it isn't how it does go. Not for most people, not for the people on this side of the bridge, the side without the carriages and the houses with bow windows. For the people on this side, it goes the way it went for you. 1 careful week at a time, 1 calculation defended, 1 commission delivered, 1 shilling accumulated, 1 morning crossed off the list and replaced by the next. This is what poverty teaches if you let it teach you instead of break you. Not the moral lesson that the people who write about poverty from a comfortable distance like to offer, the lesson about resilience, or gratitude, or the dignity of labour, all of which are easier to write about than to possess at 5 a.m. on a cold floor. Not that. The practical lesson, how narrow the margin really is, how close the hand in the pocket is to finding nothing, how completely the body is implicated. The cold through the heel, the ache in the neck, the hunger that becomes the background of all thought, in the question of whether you can keep going. And also, the peacock, the rightness of the peacock's tail when the angle is correct and the shading makes the gradation your mother showed you, and the piece is alive in the way that very good work is alive. The way that exists alongside the cold floor and the bridge and the fourpence halfpenny and cannot be separated from them, is in fact produced by them, by the life that includes them, by the specific history of hands that learn to make beautiful things under conditions that were not made for beauty. That's what you carry across the bridge every day, both of them, the calculation and the peacock, the margin and the woman at the window, the hunger that becomes background and the needle finding its angle in the candlelight. They're not opposites. They're the same thing, the same life, looked at from two different directions. London is not a gentle place. You knew this before you got here. You know it now with more precision, more specific detail, in more dimensions. You know it in your shoes and your back and your eyes and the particular Tuesday evening quality of the light through the north window in mid-October, adequate and no more. You know it in the boy on the bridge and the woman with the empty pocket and the 3 arrested for the locked warehouse and the grain merchant who arrested nothing. And you're still here, still calculating, still crossing the bridge. That's the thing that London never exactly offers, and that you find anyway, on the bridge at 6 a.m. with the autumn light coming off the Thames and the day beginning whether you're ready or not. The fact of continuing. The fact that you are here, still, in the game, working the margin, making the peacock right, crossing the bridge, not triumphant, not safe, not fully, not in the way that the people in the houses with bow windows might understand safety, but present, decided, not ground. There will be more cold floors, there will be more calculations, there will be weeks when the margin narrows again and the arithmetic goes back to trading necessities against each other and the cheese disappears from the category of things you have. There will be Lady Whitmore looking at work you've made and finding something to correct that isn't wrong. There will be another boy on the bridge and another woman at the stall, and another week when London presents the bill for existing in it, and the bill is higher than expected. You will pay it. You will cross the bridge the next morning. You will thread the needle and find the angle and make the peacock live. You will put the penny into the calculation and the shilling into the cloth and the next design into your head on the walk home when the day is done. You have lasted a year. You're 20 years old and you have lasted a year in this city that people said would eat you, and the city has done its thorough and impartial best and you have not been eaten. This is not a small thing. Small. In a life full of small things that are not small, this is one of the not small ones. The crane is still in the cloth. You've kept it for yourself. The one piece you didn't bring to Mrs. Bright. The one piece that isn't a commission or a demonstration but just yours. The crane in cream and gold on white linen that you made when you were learning what you could do on your own terms. You take it out sometimes, in the evenings, when Bess is asleep and the candle is still going. You look at it. It's good. You made it, and it's good, and it belongs to you. That's enough. That, tonight, is exactly enough. Let the bridge be the bridge. Let the Thames go on being the Thames. Let the bells count the hours as they've counted them for centuries from the towers on both banks, St. Saviour's and all the others, counting out time the way time gets counted in this city, with precision and without sentiment. Centuries will pass. The London you walk through, the narrow lanes, the coal smoke, the particular smell of the river in each season, the bridge with its 2 lanes of traffic going in both directions, the north window light in Mrs. Greaves' workroom, the peg behind the door, will change beyond recognition. The bridge you cross will be replaced, and replaced again. The workroom will be gone, the dyeing shop below it, and Mrs. Simcox's dog, long gone. The grain merchant's warehouse pulled down. The boy on the bridge grown up. Or not. But someone will still be crossing the bridge in the early morning. Someone will still be making the calculation. Someone will still be putting their hand in their pocket, hoping to find what they expect, and sometimes finding it and sometimes not. Someone will still be carrying both things across, the margin and the work, the cold and the needle, the bridge and the peacock, because that's what this particular life asks of you. And the asking doesn't change, it just wears different clothes. And somewhere in the city a woman will be sitting at a window, her shoulders telling you what she's looking at the thing she can't reach yet, or deciding, or both. Some things don't change. The bridge in the morning doesn't change. The needle finding its angle doesn't change. You are tired. You have earned your tiredness. You have earned the thin mattress, and Bess's breathing, and the church bells that will count 9 and then 10, and then silence. You have earned the darkness and the warmth of being still. Finally, the body that has been moving since before 5 now allowed to stop. Let it stop. Let the needle rest. Let the cold go to wherever cold goes, when the bodies in a room have finally warmed it enough. Let the calculation quiet. Let your hands, which have been working since before the sun and will work again before it, slow and soften and finally rest. You crossed the bridge today. You'll cross it tomorrow. You've been crossing it every day, and the crossing gets to count, even if it doesn't count anywhere except in the sum of who you've been becoming, which is the only place it needs to count. You made the peacock right. You kept the crane. You're still here. That's enough for tonight. Let sleep come for you, now the way it comes for people who have spent the day earning it, without drama, without announcement, the way morning comes. Because it does, because it always does, because the bridge is there in the morning and you'll cross it, and the needle is there and the work is there and the margin that you are slowly, shilling by shilling, making into something. Tomorrow there will be the bridge. Tomorrow there will be the north window and the frame and the commission, and Mrs. Greaves' precise attention and the good work that you've learned to do. Tomorrow there will be the calculation, ongoing, unfinished, the calculation that never quite concludes, but that you've gotten better at, more expert at, more at home in than you thought you could become. But that's tomorrow. Right now there is the darkness and the bells and the breathing and the warmth that 10 months of this city have taught you to receive without ceremony, without gratitude performed for an audience. Just receive, the way you receive everything now, practically, completely, without waste, the same as last night, the same as all the nights stretching out behind you, from the first December floor to this one, each one crossed and counted. The city breathes around you. The Thames moves without stopping. The bells count toward morning. Sleep now. You've earned it. good night.